Hokage, Chronicle of the True Farewell. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction, so please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter, and if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 101. The water dragon explodes and the sky suddenly darkens. Elsewhere, in front of an izakaya just 2 blocks from the site of the catastrophe, Aburane Ryoma suddenly raised his head and turned toward the towering 6-story building on Kabukicho. The parasites within his body stirred faintly, giving him a foreboding feeling. All around him was silence, even the wind seemed to carry a chilling air. A moment later, Aburane Ryoma lowered his head and cast a cold glance at Uchiha Chi. Reaching from within his wide sleeves, he attempted to snatch the scroll from Chihiro's grasp. But how could Chihiro let him succeed? The scroll contained the family's award to Uchiha Chi. He immediately stepped aside, his Sharingan flashing, and met his gaze coldly. "What do you want to do?" Aburane Ryoma frowned, displeased with the Uchiha's lack of cooperation. He was about to use his power to pressure him when, boom! A sudden roar echoed from the nearby street. The terrace collapsed, and a flood surged. A massive wave, over 10 meters high, crashed down, startling everyone present. They immediately leaped to the surface, leaping to a higher point. Chihiro's eyes widened as he looked toward the side of the commotion. Uchiha Chi had borrowed his 100,000 ryo and then sneaked out the door. He knew where Uchiha Chi had gone without even having to think. After all, as a senior, he could only give a knowing look. But now, a ninja clash had suddenly erupted in that place? Chihiro cursed inwardly, wondering what was wrong with this kid. Why did fighting break out wherever he went? He instantly leaped up, carrying the massive scroll on his back, stepped onto the wave, and charged forward. Aburane Ryoma, watching Chihiro's movements, understood immediately and waved, signaling his 3 subordinates to follow. Soon, the group transformed into shadows, sprinting towards the scene of the conflict. Meanwhile, Katachi Yagura intends to kill you right here and now, facing Karachi Yagura and Hazuki Mainjutsu, surrounded by numerous Unokuni refugees. Uchiha Chi immediately sought a new battlefield. Fighting them on the water was a complete gamble. Within 2 rounds, his offensive would be crushed, and he would be infinitely outmatched by Yagura, who excelled in water-based techniques. Fortunately, Uchiha Chi was a semi-proficient water-based ninja. While water-based techniques were no match for waves, he could still manage to pull them back. Using the swirling high-speed water, he used water-based techniques. He could advance, engaging in a barrage of attacks, retreat into close combat and exploit weaknesses. As long as he avoided being stabbed by the great sword Samehoda summoned by Hazuki Mainjutsu, he could easily fight the 2 for more than 10 rounds. Meanwhile, the 2 men on the opposite side had also noticed Uchiha Chi's movements. Yagura immediately raised his hookstick, creating a water mirror to block the incoming tile shuriken. He raised his brow and chuckled, "Want to run? Sorry, in this environment, no one can escape my grasp." He remained in a position without forming any seals. In reality, a vast amount of chakra had seeped into the surrounding water, allowing him to detect and perform ninjutsu. This was a combat method used by water-based ninjas with vast chakra reserves. At this moment, Yagura flew onto the water, crouched down, formed a seal with both hands, and pressed them against the surface. The next moment, the surrounding water surface shook, and suddenly, a whip of water formed by over 20 streams burst out, the tail of which swung out with a sound like a sonic boom, hurling itself towards Uchiha Chi at high speed. Uchiha Chi immediately recognized that this was the water-style water whip used by the chasing ninja who had followed Mainjutsu Hazuki. The difference was that the chasing ninja could only release 1. But Yagura could actually adapt to the water environment and create more than 20 water whips. The dense and thick water whips made Uchiha Chi's scalp tingle. He quickly tapped the ground on his toes and leaped back to avoid them. After doing this, Yagura's goal was achieved. "Don't make too much noise. I will limit the battle to this rooftop. You use the ninja sword and kill him directly." Yagura raised his eyebrows, looked at the lively Uchiha Chi, and said to Mainjutsu Hazuki without turning his head. He quickly recalled the intel about Uchiha Chi being stabbed by Samehoda. Combined with the fact that he appeared unharmed, He pondered for a moment before advising, he likely possesses powerful medical ninjutsu. Once my water prison is formed, use Hirame Flounder, release with all your strength and crush him to dust, as you say. Hazuki Manayu nodded, his fangs clenching in a wry smile. He transformed himself into a puddle of water and dove under the surface, waiting for the opportunity to deliver a fatal blow to Uchiha Chi. Kirachi Yagura narrowed his eyes and channeled a further portion of his chakra towards the surface, generating a total of 36 water whips. These were simply to restrict Uchiha Chi's movements. He knew from intel that this brat's taijutsu were insidious and cunning, and he was highly skilled in subterfuge. Therefore, he would deny him the space to operate. He would use the water whip to limit his position, then use multiple levels of water dragon bite to break down his defenses, and then control him with a massive water prison. Finally, Hirame Flounder, unleashed at full force by Meijetsu Kazuki, delivered the final blow. How would you counter this flurry of attacks? Kirachi Yagura smiled faintly, already confident of victory. Meanwhile, Uchiha Chi felt immense pressure. He struggled forward, constantly shifting his position amidst the lashings of 36 water whips. He slipped past a gap, only to be driven back by 3 more massive ones. It was only 50 meters, yet it felt like a world away. In the original story, Kirachi Yagura rarely displayed abilities beyond his Jinchuriki status, and was often controlled by Ibito. Uchiha Chi knew that his opponent possessed only the strange water style, water mirror technique and wind style, typhoon. Now, the true strength of his opponent, revealed, proved far more formidable than he had imagined. This was a being unlike any previous enemy. A ninja fighting style possessing vast chakra and mastering the elemental escape techniques to perfection. A dignified and unyielding style. He crushes you with sheer force, yet employs masterful technique to compel you to compete. This is Kirachi Yagura. As the future 4th Mizukage, he possesses a pure heart, unknowingly gathering the power of all the Kurigakure ninjas. A cage-level figure. Uchiha Chi feels as if he's fighting a poor version of Prince Naruto. At that moment, the surrounding wind and waves suddenly subside. Uchiha Chi, already irritated by the pressure of 36 water whips, felt a sudden jump in his heart. He turned to look at Yagura's position. He was crouching on the surface of the water, his hands already forming the final rooster seal. The next moment, the surface of the water erupted, and 2 massive water dragons flew out, fangs bared, snapping down upon Uchiha Chi. At the same moment, the entire surface of the water began to tremble, rising slightly, quickly forming the shape of a cage. To escape the water prison was to be attacked by the water dragon. To resist the water dragon was to be trapped by it. Uchiha Chi finally saw the enemy's battle plan clearly, and his heart sank slightly, feeling doomed. But the next second, he took a deep breath and pushed the thought to the back of his mind. Looking at Yagura, who smiled triumphantly, Uchiha Chi's eyes turned cold. The next moment, he raised his palm and pressed it over his heart. However, at that moment, the sky suddenly darkened. Literally. Dark clouds obscured the sky, blocking out the sun, casting shadows on the ground. A sudden buzzing sound arose, and everyone looked up in shock to see that the vast dark cloud was actually composed of a dense swarm of insects. With such a powerful presence, a figure clad in a black robe, hands in pockets, and wearing sunglasses, slowly strode across the water. His face was expressionless. Chapter 102 Longma comes to the rescue and a chaotic battle breaks out. On the field, water dragons tangled, the waters surged violently. Kirachi Yagura's pupils shrank slightly upon seeing the newcomer. This attire, coupled with this level of insect-controlling jutsu, instantly recognized him as the deputy of Konoha's Anbu, the Root's deputy commander, Aburame Ryoma. Normally, a Root possessed no name, no emotions, no past, and no future. But, like Kakashi's time in the Anbu, a ninja with distinct characteristics and formidable combat prowess, even as a Root member, concealing their true identity, would be deeply feared by their enemies and thus earn a name, and Aburame Ryoma was precisely such a being. At that moment, he approached indifferently, pulled a hand from his pocket, and gently waved it. A cloud of parasitic insects, covering the sky and the sun, descended in front of Uchiha Chi, encircling him and protecting him. This was the secret technique, insect wall. It caused the black cloud of parasitic insects to swirl and rise, forming a wall for defense. This scene stunned both combatants, their movements halting in unison. Uchiha Chi, now gazing with questioning eyes at the powerful Root warrior approaching with the air of a powerful leader, recognized Aburame Ryoma and Yasui. But this man's presence, protected by a secret technique, left Uchiha Chi perplexed. When he first saw him, Uchiha Chi had assumed he was sent by Danzo to assassinate him, to stop Orochimaru from accepting an Uchiha as his disciple. But now, what was going on? After protecting Uchiha Chi, Aburame Ryoma raised his head slightly, his gaze fixed indifferently on Yagura from behind his sunglasses. He spoke coldly, "You are Karachi Yagura, leader of the Karigakure Jounin squad, an elite Jounin." Really? Yagura was also bewildered, unable to understand what had happened to the world. Despite the question, Yagura still rose straight from the water. He gripped his grappling stick in both hands and pointed it coldly at the other party, his brow furrowed. "Your root would actually protect an Uchiha? That's quite unusual." Aburame Ryoma was also silent for a moment. When he received the order from Shimura Danzo, he too had felt something inexplicably strange about it. But it was a mission after all, so he shook his head and replied coldly, "Things in this world are just so bizarre. If you want to know why, it's because the brat you're trying to attack, he's the deputy commander of the root, a disciple of Orochimaru, one of the 3 ninjas of Konoha and the heir to the 4th Hokage. Now, he's a member of our root." Hearing this, Yagura was stunned, looking up at Uchiha Chi in astonishment, almost wondering if he had misheard. An Uchiha could become a disciple of Orochimaru, one of the 3 ninjas? And a member of the root at that? This was simply outrageous, outrageous to the core. And why this brat, specifically? At this thought, Yagura's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Uchiha Chi knew of their plan, and now he was a member of the root. If he reported this to root leader Danzo Shimura, there was no guarantee the anti-ninja wouldn't intervene against the unstable Karigakure. While Konoha was currently engaged in a war with Tsunagakure in the Rain Country to the northwest, Tsunagakure alone couldn't bring Konoha's full strength to bear. Yagura took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the grappling staff, and his gaze grew cold. "Want to attack?" Aburame Ryoma scoffed at this, then spoke calmly and coldly. "You and your men must have escaped through the secret passage in Kabukicho. It was only a matter of time before we were discovered. Now, there's a group of pursuers behind you. Every moment you stay here, the danger increases." So, Aburame Ryoma pulled his hands from his pockets, raised them, and glared at Yagura coldly. "Do you want to antagonize us here, or get out of here?" "Us?" Uchiha Chi couldn't help but raise his brows at this. The next moment, a dense stream of black shadows suddenly appeared and landed in front of Uchiha Chi. This group of more than a dozen people, all wearing intricately patterned masks, Konoha Enbu combat uniforms, and ninja swords on their waists, looked indifferently at Yagura, who was about to attack. For a moment, the atmosphere on the field stagnated. Over a dozen root ninjas lined up in a row, their imposing presence causing even Karachi Yagura to frown. With so many men, plus the elite Jonin like Aburame Ryoma, even if the situation favored them and he and Mainjutsu Kazuki combined, they were confident of victory. Once the battle began, the dynamics would be completely uncontrollable. Furthermore, just before Aburame Ryoma arrived, he had felt a subtle palpitation. It felt as if continuing the battle would lead to encountering something dangerous. The source of that danger was the brat protected by the root in the field. At this moment, Aburame Ryoma narrowed his eyes slightly, thoughtfully saying, "After all this talk, you still haven't left. Is it because this brat possesses information that you're afraid of?" Upon hearing this, Yagura's expression suddenly changed. A smile of amusement crossed Aburame Ryoma's face. "Interesting, then give it a try. See if you can kill this brat under my hand." As soon as he finished speaking, the parasitic insects that obscured the sky began to stir. From Aburame Ryoma's open palms, more parasitic insects began to fly. Black clouds condensed and fell, transforming into the form of Aburame Ryoma. Secret technique, insect clone. Suddenly, 3 more Aburame Ryomas appeared on the battlefield. The 4 Aburame Ryomas wielded 12 secret technique, insect balls and surrounded them. The dense swarm of parasitic insects fluttered their wings, creating a continuous buzzing sound. Then, the parasitic insects that obscured the sky began to move, gathering together and gradually forming the beginnings of a tornado. Seeing this, Yagura also understood his opponent's plan. Aburame Ryoma wanted to escalate the battle, cause a commotion, and attract the attention of the outside ninja. This nascent tornado was the Aburame clan's secret technique, the insect tornado. Its power was immense, and its noise was terrifying. He let out a heavy breath, his mind already made up. He immediately gave a cold command, "Maingetsu, Terumi Mei, let's go." However, while the three members of Kurigakure were a team, they weren't superiors or subordinates. Yagura wanted to leave, but Maingetsu Hazuki, who was envious of his enemies, had no intention of leaving. And Madarumi, who had been carefully watching Maingetsu Hazuki's movements, wouldn't let him kill Uchiha Chi. Quickly, using Yagura's water jutsu to control the water falling from the roof, Maingetsu Hazuki followed the current and quietly slipped into the insect wall cast by Burame Ryoma. This moment was captured by Madarumi and the vigilant Uchiha Chi. The next moment, almost simultaneously, 3 thunderous shots rang out. Hiramu Flounder, release, dissolve style, monster dissolving jutsu, fire style, chakra mode, activate. Instantly, a blade of light rose from the ground, extending over 8 meters in length, slicing down towards Uchiha Chi's forehead. Terumi Mei suddenly blocked Uchiha Chi's path, forming hand seals with her hands, and from her throat erupted a vast river of dissolved style steaming with hot acid mist, corroding Hazuki Maingetsu. Uchiha Chi, on the other hand, didn't hesitate. He instantly pressed his heart, igniting the heart of his immortal body. Instantly, flames erupted. Watching this, Yagura, watching from the sidelines, felt his scalp tingle. He didn't bother to call for a retreat, and without a second thought, he stomped his foot down, stamping on the water. A torrent of water erupted from beneath his feet, a 10-meter-long water dragon bursting forth, carrying him towards the center of the battlefield. Naturally, Burame Ryoma wouldn't let him go. 4 clones leaped into the air, transforming into a cloud of parasitic insects that covered the sky and sun, pouncing on Yagura. In a split second, the battlefield was in complete chaos. The entire battlefield was a mess. Chapter 103, The Terrifying Immortal Body. Second form. An 8-meter-long blade of light descended with a whirlwind, blasting the air and ripping through the molten river, slashing headlong towards Uchiha Chi. Hazuki Maingetsu's eyes were fierce, and he roared in a broken voice, "Die! You bastard!" The next moment, the light blade released by Hirame Flounder, unleashed smashed through the molten river from beginning to end, slashing towards Uchiha Chi. That's right, it smashed. Hirame Flounder, unleashed, at full power, erupted from Hazuki Maingetsu's hand, resembling a bladeless heavy sword. In the blade's path stood Madarumi, standing in Uchiha Chi's way. Hazuki Maingetsu, with no regard for the lives of her fellow ninjas, was determined to take Uchiha Chi's life. Madarumi's emerald pupils suddenly shrank. A turret-like ninja like her had limited speed, not to mention the fact that she was desperately spewing molten river water. Seeing the heavy sword, over a meter wide, like a stick, crushing down, she desperately mobilized her chakra, increasing the power and range of her ninjutsu, hoping to force Hazuki Maingetsu to retreat in fear. However, Hazuki Maingetsu, his hands stained with the blood of his colleagues, had already gone mad. At this moment, Hazuki Maingetsu's eyes were fixed on Uchiha Chi. He wouldn't retreat a single step, even if the hot molten acid on his cheek corroded a bloody hole. He was determined to kill him. Not only because his eye had been gouged out, but also because Uchiha Chi's outrageous words were so sharp and dangerous. He had seen through him completely. This feeling of humiliation and fear, like having his underwear exposed, was something Hazuki Maingetsu had never experienced before. It filled him with shame, resentment, and rage. Whenever they faced each other on the same battlefield, he was inexplicably afraid of being exposed again. This gave rise to a morbid, desperate, and twisted desire to completely and utterly eliminate him from the world. Moreover, Uchiha Chi's ideals perfectly aligned with his own. If he could forcibly seize his will, assassinate the Mizukage, control the daimyo, and complete a bloody revolution. Such ideals, such thoughts, such achievements, such a grand dream. All of it would be his. Ho 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 ho. Nizine, a sickly smile crossed Hazuki Maingetsu's face, a cold gleam gleaming in his single purple eye. He cursed and laughed wildly as he swung his sword. Uchiha Chi's brows twitched, suddenly realizing something was amiss. Hazuki Maingetsu's gaze frightened him, a strange feeling reminiscent of that night 3 days ago when his younger brother, Hiden, was watching him with such frenzied intensity. Holy shit, what the hell? He stared at the 8-meter-long heavy sword charging towards him, at Terumi Mei, who stood before him without flinching, her delicate features brimming with determination. He let out a deep breath, then slapped his heart, instantly igniting a fire within him. Boom! A massive sun rose in the air. Then, Uchiha couldn't help but let out a startled scream. This scream wasn't just out of shock at the frantic mainjutsu in the reckless Terumi Mei, but also out of astonishment at his own physical condition. At that moment, his heart, ablaze with white-hot flames, roared and throbbed like an engine fueled by 98-octane gasoline. It continuously poured extreme fire attribute chakra into his body. Fire attribute chakra, like the sun's blazing sun, formed an incandescent sheath around him. But that wasn't the point. The point was, what the hell was going on? No, can someone fix this bug? Why can't my heart be burned through? As the only veteran in the Uchiha clan to have had his heart burned twice, Uchiha was very experienced with heartburns. Normally, his heart would have reduced to a pile of charcoal in 0.5 seconds after igniting the fire chakra mode, barely surviving under the forbidden technique of flesh transformation. Yet, now, aside from the excruciating pain of being seared by flames, his heart was completely unharmed. Uchiha's brain instantly shut down, his eyes widening. What the hell? What the hell is going on? Is this even a good insurance scam? He knew that in the original story, Hidden's immortality was highly resistant to ninjutsu, so Asuma's incinerating fire jutsu would have been no problem against him. But, was this really necessary? Even the heart inside his body was so fire resistant. Holy shit, at 1,000 curse words omitted here, are you made of porcelain? At that moment, a subtitle suddenly popped up before Uchiha's eyes. Due to the coexistence of your talents, immortality, incomplete, forbidden technique, flesh reincarnation, adept, incomplete, and zero-tail mode, dark awakening, you are immune to the side effects of fire style, chakra mode, therefore, fire style, chakra mode, mastery, critical, has had its critical suffix removed and has been downgraded to regular skill. Note, if chakra is insufficient to cover the cost of forbidden technique, flesh reincarnation, this technique still carries a higher risk. In this mode, this skill set is automatically named Heart of Steel, S+, description, after being seared by the blazing flames of sincerity. Forged through countless trials. This mighty heart has been transformed into your unwavering strength. Uchiha snapped back to his senses, and before he could curse, an 8-meter-long blade had already struck down. In front of him, Terumi Mei watched as the massive heavy sword approached, about to smash her forehead into a puddle of ash. A flash of panic, fear, and despair filled her eyes, but she didn't run. She bit her cheek, her emerald green eyes struggling for a moment before she continued to push forward. Even if it meant helping the young man behind her survive for just one more second, it was worth it. Finally, she angrily cursed, Uchiha, what the hell are you doing, you idiot? Just move, I really owe you. He knelt down, hands clasped together, and stood in the blazing sun, glaring at Mainjutsu, who was laughing morbidly while leaning on his sword behind his heavy sword. With the rage of being backstabbed from many sides, he shouted, fuck, you idiot from the Mainjutsu family, you dare to kill me, last time it was just a momentary slip, I was just letting you go, next, I'll show you. Uchiha tilted his head back, the anger in his eyes so stagnant that he couldn't vent it at all. Then, he roared, my second form, Immortal Shiro, I've received your advice. I'll adjust my state in time these days to warm up. I'll try to update 3 times next month. Bearing Teeth JPG. Chapter 104, Flame Fist Broken Blade, Immortal Shura. Facing Uchiha's furious roar, Hazuki Mainjutsu sneered, what a joke, you're only capable of underhanded tactics and exaggerated claims. You don't understand, what does a true genius mean? Wielding his most proficient twin blades, the Hiramazuchi, his already exceptional talent was magnified many times over by the ninja swords. In the next instant, a condensed blade of light crushed down, and the intense wind pressure sent roof tiles flying and creaking. The surrounding water surface began to sag before the blade even touched, and waves rose high on both sides. An ordinary mortal would be powerless to resist such a blow. They would be crushed to dust by the blade. Even if Uchiha had a trump card, it wouldn't save him. Moreover, in Hazuki Mainjutsu's eyes, this brat was nothing more than a swindler relying on a single hardening technique, fancy manipulation, and insidious tactics to commit fraud. However, at this moment, Uchiha suddenly opened his clasped hands. He gazed up at the giant blade before him, a flaming flame igniting between his teeth. Boom! The white-hot flowing flames that swirled throughout his body surged, each strand converging on his right fist. At that moment, his fist shone like a small sun, The violent force of the Zero Tail's dark chakra amplified his physical strength, giving him the power to shatter rock with his bare hands. But it wasn't enough. Facing the condensed light blades of his dual blades, Hirame no Katsu, at full power, it was far from enough. This was a force that could nearly kill even Black Zetsu. So, when his fire-style chakra mode couldn't incinerate him, he had mastered another way to harness this power without a teacher. Just like the transformation of the flowing flame giant sword and the 6-foot fire blade, he unleashed the full force of his fire-style chakra mode onto his right fist. The concentrated flames shifted from blazing yellow to blazing white, converging into a single point, reaching their peak. This was Uchiha Chi's most powerful punch. It wasn't the kind of power gleaned from the meticulous manipulation of chakra like Tsunade's super strength punch, it was pure chakra explosion. A punch so powerful it sent bricks flying. Boom. Suddenly, a massive blade loomed, crushing down with destructive force. Uchiha Chi's face was devoid of fear or hesitation. He glared, crouched, and exerted force from his back. With one punch, a sonic boom erupted. The failure of his insurance scam ignited his rage into fiery rage. He roared, "You're a genius, aren't you? Damn you. Even if you're a piece of shit, you've got to take my flaming punch first." His fist, radiant like the sun, struck out fiercely, like an ant trying to resist an oncoming dump truck at 180 miles per hour. The tiny, human fist collided with a massive blade of light, 8 meters long and just over 1 meter wide. The two forces collided, unleashing a dazzling ball of light. Instantly, the ground shook, the water trembled, and the roof collapsed. Massive splashes of water, over 10 meters high, erupted from the surface of the water, then crashed down with a bang. The 8-meter-long blue blade of light, unexpectedly deflected half a meter by Uchiha Chi's punch. Then, suddenly, it swung down with unparalleled force, crushing Uchiha Chi's right arm from the base to the very end. Bones, blood, muscles, and myofibrillaries all disintegrated. Densely packed, tiny, pitch-black threads pulled it back, then reorganized it into a pool of muddy limbs. The blade of light, now cracked, and with a snap, it disintegrated into a chaotic mass of chakra. Huff, Uchiha Chi immediately released his fire-style chakra mode, a wave of intense fatigue washing over him. While this mode was powerful, it was incredibly chakra-intensive. Even with his little zero tail fully charged, he could only use it twice. For more, he would have to find extreme emotions and synthesize dark chakra. Now that his life was no longer in danger, this mode couldn't cause him much harm. If he kept it running, it might be considered a deliberate suicide, and that would be a disaster. He took 2 deep breaths, scooped up Madarumi from the side with his left hand, hoisted her over his shoulder, and leaped away. Uchiha Chi quickly pulled away, tossing the stunned Madarumi aside and carefully surveying the situation on the field. The explosion of water landed, and the situation on the field became clearer. However, at this moment, a dispassionate sound of footsteps echoed. Hazuki Mainjutsu, clutching his twin blades, Hirame Flounder, slowly emerged from the mist. Seeing Uchiha Chi's state, he raised an eyebrow in admiration. "I never thought you'd possess such a skill. The sword capable of shattering Hirame Flounder's unleashed chakra is truly a dangerous force." Soon, Hazuki Mainjutsu's gaze fell on Uchiha Chi's severed right hand, a cold sneer on his face. "But, just to block my sword, you'll lose an arm." Then, his gaze darkened, and he raised his twin blades, Hirame Flounder. A surge of chakra suddenly surged from the massive blades, forming a massive 6-meter-long chakra blade. Hazuki Mainjutsu swung the 6-meter-long chakra blade with a fierce force, stirring up a gust of wind. Standing far above the water, he slashed his sword straight at Uchiha Chi. The massive sword tip, emitting a surge of chakra, pressed against Uchiha Chi's nose. Then, Uchiha Chi heard Kitano Manayu raise his head and let out a sinister laugh. "Uchiha Chi, how many more of my swords can you block? Huh? Next time, are you going to explode your left hand, or your leg? Did you see that? This is the difference between a mortal and a genius." However, seeing the violent chakra surging wildly from the sword tip before him, Uchiha Chi lowered his head and let out a low, mocking laugh. "Hey, hum ha ho ho ha ho ha." He suddenly raised his head and sneered disdainfully. "You think you've won just like that? Well, what about this?" He suddenly raised his hand, and a blazing flame spread from his heart to his right arm. Amidst the blazing flames, dense threads of earth resentment dragged the shattered body tissues back together on this arm. The secret technique of earth resentment suturing, the forbidden technique of flesh transformation, and the immortal body shone brilliantly in the flames. Soon, a brand new right arm, reborn from the ashes. Seeing this, everyone present gasped, their eyes filled with shock. Several battle circles simultaneously stopped and looked over. Hazuki Maingetsu's eyes were filled with disbelief. He saw clearly that his sword had completely crushed Uchiha-Chi's right arm. And yet, the other party, like an invincible cockroach, instantly reassembled the broken limb, repairing it perfectly. It was a miracle. Could this be the second form the other party had mentioned, the immortal Shura? At this thought, Hazuki Maingetsu couldn't help but swallow. After doing all this, Uchiha-Chi raised his head, looked at Hazuki Maingetsu with disdain, and sneered, "I can fight you like this for a whole day." Then, he lit up a pair of scarlet Sharingan, looking at Hazuki Maingetsu from top to bottom. Soon, he showed a meaningful smile, and ruthlessly exposed, "And you, how many more swords can you swing?" As soon as these words came out, the expression on Hazuki Maingetsu's face suddenly twisted. Chapter 105, Cheat. Sneak Attack. This is the passionate ninja battle. The first time Maingetsu drew his sword, the blade stretched 8 meters, like a dump truck at 180 miles per hour, bearing unparalleled force. This second time, measured precisely by Uchiha-Chi's Sharingan, the blade measured a mere 6 meters at most. While still long, its unparalleled power was instantly diminished. Considering the characteristics of the dual-bladed harem breasts in the original story, the blades accumulate chakra as they kill more enemies, increasing their power. They are weapons that strengthen their wielders with each battle. Maingetsu's immense chakra capacity, combined with the chakra absorbed by the numerous Kurigakure ninjas he stabbed with his ninja sword, combined to enable him to unleash such powerful moves. However, this power has its limits. As Maingetsu continuously releases harem breasts, depleting the inherent chakra within the ninja sword, the power of harem breasts release diminishes. Assuming the opponent loses 2 meters each time, he still has at least 3 more uses left. As for Uchiha-Chi, his own family knew his own business. He could only use the same blade-breaking flame fist twice. In terms of physical strength, even if he could now unleash fire-style chakra mode without damage, he was still no match for his opponent. But it didn't matter, that was how ninja battles were. Uchiha-Chi possessed information about the ninja sword, while Hazuki Maingetsu had no knowledge of his mode. So, he began to lie. As long as Hazuki Maingetsu believed him, he would become a truly tough guy who could fight all day long. And then, he fell into Uchiha-Chi's carefully laid trap. Meanwhile, outside the arena, the root ninjas, caught in the aftermath of this battle, were unable to participate. They could only flee, observing the events coldly from the sidelines. Their mission was simply to protect Uchiha-Chi from death. Now that Uchiha-Chi was capable of counterattacking, they lacked the ability to participate in a fight of this magnitude. Like Madarumi, they could only helplessly watch from the sidelines. But if they could catch Maingetsu showing a flaw, they would strike decisively. Aburin Ryoma, commanding the root ninjas and currently facing Yagura, looked at Uchiha-Chi with a look of surprise that turned to thoughtfulness. Finally, his gaze lingered on Uchiha-Chi's fully repaired right arm. So that's why Orochimaru accepted him as his disciple. Haha, these two are quite a match. As if thinking of something funny, Aburin Ryoma suddenly curled up the corners of his mouth, shook his head and laughed. One pursues immortality, the other is unafraid of death. Tisk tisk, this is really interesting. Yagura, who was standing opposite him, was also full of amazement at this time. He looked at Uchiha-Chi's intact right arm. Although he was an opponent, he couldn't help but exclaimed, "This technique is so powerful, high-speed body repair, and a powerful fire-style ninjutsu. Is this the foundation of a 1,000-year-old clan?" But, Yagura frowned slightly. "Why is this technique called Immortal Shura? This name is too weird." His eyes looking at Uchiha-Chi became slightly solemn. He had sensed a sense of danger just now. Now it seems that he still underestimated this kid. Who would have thought that such a young Uchiha could burst out with such power? Soon, this solemnity gave way to murderous intent. Hiradachi Yagura finally understood why Maingetsu Hazuki was so determined to kill him here. Such a dangerous young enemy village warrior had appeared, especially in Uchiha. If 2 Magatama were enough, wouldn't 3 Magatama be lawless? Even if his and Maingetsu's plan were exposed, it was necessary to nip it in the bud. Hiradachi Yagura took a deep breath, raised his grappling staff, and a cold look flashed across his eyes. The next moment, he broke into a run, his petite body shattering the water, stirring up massive waves. He charged fearlessly into the battlefield. However, Aburame Ryoma, ever vigilant, immediately launched a cloud of insects, blocking his path. If Yagura dared to charge in, his chakra would be devoured and he would die instantly. Aburame Ryoma pushed up his sunglasses and said calmly, "You can't get through. If you ask why, that's simply because I'm strong." HMPH, Yagura snorted, backflipping to avoid him, pressing his palms against the water to stop his momentum. He shook his head, clasping his hands together in a C-seal, and laughed heartily, saying, "You're wrong. You didn't stop me, I stopped you. You underestimated Hazuki Mainjutsu. If that's all this bread is capable of." Yagura's eyes flashed coldly, and two water dragons suddenly burst forth from beneath his feet, lunging at Aburame Ryoma. "Then he'll be dead." Water style, double water dragon bomb. The next moment, a cloud of insects swept across the sky, transforming into a tornado. The water dragons roared, and the water danced in the air. The two titans engaged in another clash. Meanwhile, Hazuki Mainjutsu looked at Uchiha Chi with a distorted expression, at his brand new right hand. He had to admit, he had underestimated him. But, he took a deep breath, his eyes cold, a fierce murderous intent flashing in his pupils. Even if Uchiha Chi's words were true, he was confident of victory. With this thought in mind, Hazuki Manayu raised his twin swords, Hirame Flounder, and gathered the massive radiant blades of Hirame Flounder unleashed. He twisted his feet against the water's surface, running like a ninja, creating a series of splashes. He strode forward. He meticulously observed the details of Uchiha Chi's super regeneration technique. It seemed the opponent couldn't achieve true, perfect super regeneration. At least, the speed of complete regeneration was extremely slow. Uchiha Chi was actually relying on those tiny threads to gather and piece together the body tissue he had crushed into the water, then activate the super regeneration technique based on this. In other words, by dismembering the opponent and throwing him where the black threads couldn't reach, that part of his body couldn't regenerate instantly. And from their previous encounter, Hazuki Mainjutsu happened to know that Uchiha Chi's basic taijutsu and swordsmanship were utterly useless. He only needed to leave 3 opportunities for Hirame no Hashimoto, released to counter his flame fist. 3 chances would buy him a significant amount of time. And he wouldn't even need that many moves, only 10. Within 10 moves, with his secret Hazuki Ryu swordsmanship, he could crush Uchiha Chi with his swordsmanship. Cleave him to pieces. However, watching Hazuki Mainjutsu charging forward with a wildly confident smile on his face, Uchiha Chi gave a sinister smile. When Hazuki Mainjutsu fell into this kind of thinking, it meant his opponent had taken the bait. He was now a completely different person from the one who could only survive with swordsmanship and tricks. Uchiha Chi now possessed the skills to harm Hazuki Mainjutsu. The next moment, Uchiha Chi clasped his palms together, his entire body once again surging with blazing flames. Fire style, chakra mode, activated. Blazing flames transformed into a garment. In the light of the fire, a pair of fiery red Sharingan illuminated, flames dancing in his eyes. 2 jet black Magatama began to spin rapidly as he closely watched Hazuki Mainjutsu's movements. He formed hand seals, Maui Si. Water style, water fang blade. A burst of mist surged, and a 6-foot-long flaming blade burst forth. He gripped the hilt of the blade, shimmering with ethereal flames, and staggered his feet, shoulder-width apart. Uchiha Chi wore a sinister grin. Now that his prey had walked into his carefully prepared trap, what was there to wait for? Now, it was time to feast. Chapter 106, Sit and Kill the Disciples, Fight Against the Will of Heaven. The 2 men instantly charged at each other. Hazuki Mainjutsu, dragging his massive sword across the water, his right hand raised. Water style, water cannon, continuous fire, 6 water bullets, each as powerful as a bullet, blocked Uchiha Chi's escape route. He twisted his foot and leaped high, wielding his Hirame Flounder with a powerful strike that slashed down on his head. Uchiha Chi didn't even try to dodge, as 6 water bullets whirled past him, aiming and slashing. He bent his waist, meeting the opponent's falling sword, and raised his flaming blade to strike Hazuki Mainjutsu in the face. 2 swords, one slashing, the other slashing. Both were aimed directly at the face, a life or death struggle. In this situation, this was no longer just a duel of swordsmanship. It was a battle between the secret art of water transformation and immortality. Come on, Uchiha Chi's eyes flashed with frenzy, ignoring the massive blade that threatened to split his brain in 2. With a roar, He swung the flame blade in his hand. "Let's see who dies first, you or me." The flame blade erupted in a blazing flame. Before it could reach Meijetsu's hydrated form, the intense heat sent a puff of white smoke billowing from the hydrated form of Kitano Meijetsu. The flame blade, with its characteristically high fire properties, was actually able to defy the restraints of ninjutsu and injure Meijetsu, even after his hydrated form. Meijetsu's pupils suddenly constricted, and he immediately abandoned the idea of slashing at Uchiha Chi and forcibly pulled his arm back to turn her aim. At that moment, Uchiha Chi suddenly twisted the hilt of his blade, and the blazing tip of the shape-shifting flame blade instantly burst forth. Boom! The extended, blazing red blade clashed with Hirame's broad blade, transforming into a pool of blazing flames that completely enveloped Meijetsu. The surge of force sent him careening backward, like a stone thrown from a watery slosh, bouncing several times before finally stopping. With a hiss, Meijetsu climbed out of the water, blade in hand, his gaze alight with horror. The water surging over his body, extinguishing the engulfing flames and revealing a body covered in burn scars. Never before had Meijetsu felt so formidable. His opponent showed no fear of death. Every strike was a life or death struggle, and it was incredibly treacherous. You thought he was going to strike, but he suddenly reversed his motion, switching from a slashing blow to a forward thrust. Meijetsu was stunned. How could a sword move be used with a shot? If he hadn't just drawn his sword in time to block the incoming flaming blade with the broad blade of his Hirame no Katsura, his heart would have been pierced and incinerated. Even if he had used a thunder blade or a long sword, he wouldn't have been able to block it. At this moment, Uchiha Chi flung his sword away, unleashing a dazzling blaze of slashing swords. He couldn't help but raise an eyebrow and smile. This single strike, after laying numerous traps and luring Meijetsu into a desperate fight, hadn't killed Meijetsu. What a stroke! Truly a genius of Kirigakure. Now, Uchiha Chi had revealed all his cards, yet Meijetsu's underdog was still to be revealed. Uchiha Chi had staked his bets, leaving only a desperate gamble, a bet that Meijetsu could crack his system and grant him a death sentence. Immortality plus shape-shifting flaming blade plus the fatal blade-breaking flame fist. Genius of Kirigakure, can you crack it? Uchiha Chi stared intently at him, a glint of hope in his eyes. He was now truly formidable. Even those below the rank of Kage would struggle to kill him. Furthermore, it was foreseeable that once he mastered this foundation, he would be apprehended and severely disciplined by Uchiha Setsuna, the shameless old man who had forcibly claimed him as his grandson, upon returning to his clan. By then, having completed the basics of ninjadom and mastered the Uchiha flow technique, swordsmanship, illusion technique, and numerous other ninjutsu, he would undoubtedly reach the threshold of Kage. That would be even more difficult. But Uchiha Chi had no desire to remain in this world. In the real world, he had his own path, his own dreams, and his own family back home. He had been forced into this world by the will of heaven. He had been forced. That day, when the choice presented itself on the road, Uchiha Chi decisively chose to refuse. However, heaven did not let him go. From that day on, various unexpected events began to plague him. He experienced countless incidents, falling billboards, cracked ceilings, bridge collapses, being held hostage by bank robbers, fires, and serial explosions. After each incident, the same subtitle would pop up before his eyes: "The willpower of this earth creature has been detected to meet the recruitment criteria of Shinodai Company. Would you like to be a sent-down tough guy?" For 3 days, he battled this ruthless boss. In the end, he couldn't escape the IAI slash of the dump truck and was sent to this world. Fortunately, after arriving in this world, Shinodai dangled the carrot of a 500 million insurance policy, preventing him from completely giving up. But even without the 500 million, he still wanted to go home. This desire was incredibly strong. You could say Uchiha Chi lacked ambition, considering the Naruto world offered powerful powers, the possibility of immortality, and a future where he could become the strongest and rule everything at will. But what did that have to do with Uchiha Chi? He wanted none of those things. He wanted battle. He loved battle. He looked forward to battle. When Shinodai put that subtitle in front of him to stop him from continuing to fight against the unfairness of fate in the real world, Shinodai had already become the enemy. So, the meaning of his life in the Naruto world has changed. Insurance money, well, although that is also important. But more important are the rules of this long battle with Shinodai. Fight to go home. Fight to resist this manipulated fate. You ask me to save the world and I will go? Why? I won't, even if it means destroying this world. This is the whole meaning of Uchiha Chi's fight so far. A crazy smile appeared on his face. After the battle, he felt the blood in his body boiling. This feeling made him obsessed, and he took a deep breath in ecstasy. Then, with a sharp gaze fixed on Hazuki Mainjutsu, he suddenly raised his hand, blade raised, and shouted fiercely, "Hazuki Mainjutsu! The genius of Kirigakure, is that all you're capable of? What are you afraid of? What are you dreading?" Uchiha Chi bent his body and twisted his steps, raising his chin, revealing a pair of frantic, crimson eyes. "Come on, give me my destined death. Fight me to the bitter end." With those words, Uchiha Chi stomped the water and burst forth like an arrow. He swung his blade, its blazing blade flaming like fire. The 6-foot-long flaming blade roaring with energy. It transformed into a 10-meter-long flaming giant sword, even larger, more spectacular, and more impressive than Hazuki Mainjutsu's 8-meter-long blade. He leaped high, twisted his body, and swung the sword down. With one blow, he slashed down head-on. The unrivaled flowing flame sword unleashed a sonic boom, evaporating a vast amount of water before it even struck, creating a dreamlike white mist. Immediately afterwards, the blazing red blade pierced the mist, illuminating the tiny Mainjutsu Hazuki below. Mainjutsu Hazuki looked up, gazing at the flowing flame sword, as if swung from a mythical source. This awe-inspiring beauty of size. This magnificence surpassed even his own. His body began to tremble, his pupils shrunk into a point, and the blood in his veins began to boil. Then, in a rage, he gritted his teeth, his eyes a ferocious look. "You're kidding?" He trembled, grasping his twin blades, the harem flounder, his eyes glaring as he roared, "How could you possibly be stronger than me?" Then, Mainjutsu Hazuki's chakra suddenly surged, madly pouring into the harem flounder in his hands. He soared from the ground, his eyes piercing. Harem flounder, unleashed. The ninja sword in his hand suddenly flashed, revealing a 10-meter blue chakra giant sword, even more powerful than the previous 8-meter blade. The next moment, two giant swords, one blue and one red, like mythical creatures, collided with each other. There's still one chapter left, a little later. Chapter 107. Death is imminent. Uchiha Chi, take the sword. Everything before him vanished into black and white lines, everything within his ears shone into a single, piercing roar. Everything within reach, everything within his senses, was drowned in a dazzling white light. It was as if hell were trembling, the very ocean itself wailing in submission under such power. From the point of impact between the two great swords, the waters parted, a surge surging to the heavens. Birds flitting across the sky were startled and dropped by the resounding roar. The civilians of the land of hot water, suffering countless disasters, simultaneously raised their heads, gazing at the dazzling light rising from the ground and reaching the sky. A fierce wind surged, and the center of the battlefield suddenly lit up. A single swing from the combatants unleashed a massive wind blade. The root ninjas' expressions paled, and they fled in haste. The scene before them awed them beyond measure, and they could only stare blankly at the two men clashing with their great swords in the center of the battlefield. Two great swords, one red and one blue, traced exaggerated arcs, colliding at breakneck speed through the white mist. With each collision, sparks would suddenly fly through the dense white fog, tinting an area with a brilliant yellow. Then, two long, crescent-shaped arcs formed, their light and shadows refracting through the mist for a long time. Then, from within the mist, they heard two roars of utterly exhilarated, indescribable joy. Uchiha Chi, Kazuki Mainjutsu. Then, boom. The two great swords clashed once again, a violent gust of wind erupting from the center of the battle, and the white mist suddenly parted. This time, the more condensed blue blade, anchored by the 7 ninja swords of the mist, clearly had the upper hand. Inch by inch, it sliced through the fiery red sword, slashing down. At this crucial moment, the broken red sword suddenly retracted, transforming into a surge of chakra that converged on Uchiha Chi's fist. Let that fist shine like the rising sun on the horizon. With one blow, the blade of light shattered. Everything returned to square one. However, the situation on the field was completely different. Hazuki Mainjutsu stood on the water, leaning on his sword, panting heavily. He looked at Uchiha Chi, who was already sprawled on the surface, breathing heavily, exhausted like a dead dog. His face darkened, a dark expression taking on a cold rebuke. "Uchiha Chi," he said, You can no longer use the technique condensed in your fist. You can't fight me like this all day. He gritted his teeth and glared at him. You cunning liar. At the last moment, Uchiha Chi had tricked him again, using that brittle, paper-thin great sword of flowing flame and those fancy special effects to trick him into unleashing the full chakra stored in his ninja sword. Now, neither of them could use such terrifying techniques. Haha, idiot. Uchiha Chi grinned and gave him the finger. He quickly instructed Xiaolinghui to swallow the dark emotions emanating from Hazuki Mainjutsu, generating dark chakra and engaging in the forbidden technique, flesh transformation. Hazuki Mainjutsu's forehead twitched, veins bulging. He didn't know what Uchiha Chi's internationally recognized gesture meant, but he could sense it wasn't a good move. The next moment, Hazuki Mainjutsu suddenly drew his sword and charged across the water, smirking, no matter how cunning you are, you'll still end up like this. With your shoddy swordsmanship, the illusory long sword you created through ninjutsu is nothing but a mirror image, a flower in the water. It's no match for you. Uchiha Chi, however, didn't bother to engage in trash talk. After restoring his strength through the forbidden technique, flesh transformation, he immediately emerged from the water, looking refreshed. He formed hand seals with his hands, clasped them together, and drew out a common flame sword, unable to transform. He dove down, meeting the incoming harem flounder with a single blow. However, the flaming blade, aimed at Hazuki Mainjutsu's vitals, was cut off mid-air by the harem flounder, imbued with chakra. Uchiha Chi was startled, his pupils shrinking. Then, he saw the twin blades of harem flounder swing down like a door panel, crashing into his chest. Uchiha Chi was sent flying by the blow. Pooh, fuck, the difference in ninja tools. He spun in mid-air, barely landing, and vomited a mouthful of blood. Looking at the ninja sword in Hazuki Mainjutsu's hand, Uchiha Chi's eyes jumped. However, before he could recover from his shock, Hazuki Mainjutsu leaped forward and slashed down with his blade. In the face of danger, Uchiha Chi's pupils shrank, and he instinctively dropped the flaming blade. Immediately, he formed hand seals and pressed his hands against the water. He then drew out two swirling water-style water fang blades, each holding a fist. They intersected and blocked Hazuki Mainjutsu's strike. The water blades spun, emitting a strange cry as they struggled under the weight. The flaming blades lacked mass and would be cut off. Meanwhile, the swords created from the water-style water fang blades had mass. The combined force of the two swords could barely block Hazuki Mainjutsu's strike, but they were powerless against Hazuki Mainjutsu, who possessed the water transformation jutsu. Furthermore, if this continued, Uchiha Chi, whose swordsmanship was inferior to Hazuki Mainjutsu's, would be overwhelmed in a matter of seconds. Swiftly, Hazuki Mainjutsu drew back his ninja sword, stepped on Uchiha Chi's water fang blades, and leaped up like a crow taking to the sky. In mid-air, he grasped the harem flounder with both hands, spun around, and with his swords in hand, launched a swift, sweeping horizontal strike. Seeing this, Uchiha Chi could only roll over to dodge the blow. But Hazuki Mainjutsu sneered, transforming himself into a puddle of water to deflect the blow. He suddenly dropped, then consolidated his body to catch the ninja sword. Ignoring the incoming water blade, he stabbed Uchiha Chi in the eye, then slashed at his hands. Uchiha Chi immediately realized what his opponent was planning and ducked his head underwater to avoid the kick. Bracing himself against the water, he lifted himself up and leaped into the air, swung out a water blade with his backhand, then unleashed the Senbon gauntlet on his wrist and unleashed all the remaining Senbon at Hazuki Mainjutsu's location. However, when Uchiha Chi wiped the water off his face and reopened his Sharingan, he saw the now dead Hazuki Mainjutsu. Then, a sudden pain pierced his back as a blade lifted him high and pierced his chest. The other blade of the double-bladed Harem no Katsura slashed through Uchiha Chi's left hand at the wrist. Uchiha Chi's eyes widened, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned his head and looked behind him in horror. Hazuki Mainjutsu's sneer echoed faintly from behind his head. Uchiha Chi, a ninja without an arm, unable to form hand seals, is nothing. His gaze fixed, and he flung Uchiha Chi's left hand away. He then severed the tendons in his hands and feet. Holding the now immobilized Uchiha Chi, he wore a cruel and ferocious expression and pronounced a cold sentence, "Your death is imminent." Uchiha Chi's eyes widened, a flash of surprise in their eyes. Though he grimaced in pain, he couldn't help but smile. This was truly the best news he had heard since leaving the village. Indeed, a severed hand prevents the use of hand seals in ninjutsu, and a pierced heart prevents the use of fire-style chakra mode. This genius from Kurigakure had truly pinpointed all his weaknesses, and then delivered a single fatal blow. Hazuki Maingetsu frowned slightly as he watched Uchiha Chi, seemingly unperturbed despite having his heart pierced, his vitality a ghost. He shook his head and tutted, "What a nuisance, but if I cut off your head and take it away, I'm sure you won't be able to repair your entire body with just one head." Hearing this, Uchiha Chi, while using the forbidden technique flesh regeneration to repair his tendons in his hands and feet, a futile effort, could not help but look at Hazuki Maingetsu in amazement. Amazing. This guy had even figured out a way to counter his immortality. So, Hazuki Maingetsu raised his head, threw Uchiha Chi onto the surface, and then drew his double swords, Hirain Flounder, aiming them at Uchiha Chi's neck. His eyes were filled with extreme excitement. This is it, Uchiha Chi. With that, Maingetsu's eyes darkened, and he swung his sword across. However, at that moment, a voice that Uchiha Chi was very familiar with suddenly rang out from the right. "Fuck, fuck, fuck, you bastard, why are you fighting again?" On the water in the distance, Seiichiro's eyes bulged as he rushed towards him, carrying a huge scroll on his back. His pupils shrank to the size of a pinprick as he watched Uchiha Chi, who was about to be beheaded. However, the distance was still too far, and no matter how he thought, he couldn't find a way to save him. He ran, scratching his head frantically, anxious like an ant on a hot pan. The next moment, his eyes darkened, and he pulled out a small, jet-black scroll with the Uchiha clan crest. He gritted his teeth and said, "Never mind." Then, Uchiha Seiichiro bent his body, twisted his steps, and simultaneously exerted force from his waist and back, hurling the scroll fiercely towards Uchiha Chi. At the same time, he shouted, "Uchiha Chi, catch the sword." Chapter 108 Kusanergi's Flame Sword. On the field, hearing Seiichiro's shout and the toss of the scroll, Hazuki Maingetsu couldn't help but frown. Then, his gaze turned cold, and he continued to swing his Hirain Flounder down with a fierce slash. Uchiha Chi had already had his tendons severed in his hands and feet. If they wanted to finish him off, now was the time. Meanwhile, thanks to the forbidden technique of flesh regeneration, Uchiha Chi had barely managed to repair his tendons. Looking at the falling sword, he raised his head and sneered at Hazuki Maingetsu, "Who says you can't unleash ninjutsu just because you lost a hand? Watch this." As he spoke, Uchiha Chi opened his right hand, pinching his index and ring fingers together. From the base of his wrist, a jet-black thread suddenly shot out, entangling a tile floating on the water's surface. Then, he grabbed it and swung it. The tile shuriken shot out, drawing a graceful arc and landing on the shattered ruins of a nearby attic roof. The thread entangled the eaves of the attic roof and suddenly straightened. Uchiha Chi clenched his fists and grasped the thread, sending a cloud of water swirling from his feet and back. He used water-style, water cut to reduce friction with the surface. Then, with a single pull, he suddenly glided free like a petrel gliding across the water. Even in this near-fatal situation, he still struggled. Still fighting. Once out of reach of Maingetsu Kazuki's slashing blows, Uchiha Chi, using one hand to support himself above the surface, leaped up, his Sharingan fixed on the jet-black scroll. He did a 720-degree flip in midair, his right hand once again grasping the thread, looping it around and landing in front of it. He opened his mouth and bit down on the scroll, landing. Then, he lifted his left hand from the water and placed it on his wrist, which was severed at the root and dripping with blood. Tentacle-like strands of jet-black thread emerged from the severed wrist, seamlessly stitching it back together. In a sense, Uchiha Chi's immortality is a more complete form of immortality. While he can't use the evil god Kultsker's based abilities, he possesses abilities unique to the future immortal duo. Repairing severed limbs, resisting ninjutsu, surviving through heartbreak, and perfectly stitched together. This is a unique miracle. A masterful combination of the secret technique, earthly grudge stitching, and immortality. Tisk, what a monstrosity. Even though Hazuki Maingetsu had anticipated this, he couldn't help but frown upon witnessing it. Then, Hazuki Maingetsu surveyed his surroundings. Unlike the previous castle encounter, this wasn't his home turf. Instead, it was Uchiha Chi's. Here, not only did the enemy have the support of the clan member from earlier, but a group of root members were also watching covetously from outside. The chasing ninjas would likely arrive soon after the commotion of the previous clash. Therefore, his failure to kill Uchiha Chi was already a failure. In this situation, if Uchiha Chi had wanted to flee, he wouldn't have been able to pursue him. However, when he saw the blazing eyes of the young man across from him, he couldn't help but curl his lips. A fighting spirit instantly flared in Hazuki Maingetsu's eyes. At this moment, he had to admit, he was in high spirits. He had to admit, he was completely overwhelmed. He had forgotten all about the righteousness of Kirigakure, the promising future, and the newly acknowledged boss, Yagura. No one of his peers had ever pushed him to this point. This kind of opponent was simply unprecedented. He had an inexplicable conviction, if it was this guy, then he absolutely would not flee. Therefore, the outcome of this battle would be decided in the next sword fight. Meanwhile, Uchiha Chi twisted his left wrist, feeling perfectly fine. It was as if every part of his body had become like the assembled parts of a Gundam, snapping together and working. It wasn't scientific at all, but it was very ninja. After repairing his left hand, he spat out the scroll, ripped off the binding, and unrolled it horizontally. He was curious. Seiichiro had called for the sword, so what kind of sword was in the scroll? A fine sword bestowed by a clan as wealthy as the Uchiha clan? Could it be the Muramasa that once wielded Uchiha Izuna? Or perhaps the great elder had done him a ruthless favor, finding him the Butsunmyoten, the Totsuken, or the Aim no Murakumo sword? Uchiha Chi raised a brow, unrolled a scroll, wiped the blood from his skin, and pressed it against it. Then, narrowing his eyes at Hazuki Maingetsu, he grinned and chuckled. Now, we're back to the same starting point. As he spoke, he grasped a cold object from the scroll's space and pulled it out. At the same time, he coldly shouted, as long as I have this sword, I can kill you immediately. However, when Uchiha Chi took out the cold object in his hand, Kitano Manayu across from him suddenly glared, staring intently at the object in Uchiha Chi's hand, and angrily scolded, Uchiha Chi, are you humiliating me? Uchiha Chi was stunned for a moment, thinking that my brother took out a village sword because he thought of you. How could it be an insult? As he thought so, he suddenly felt that the weight in his hand seemed a little off, a little light. He turned his head and looked, his eyes almost popped out. What he was holding in his hand was actually a pair of fishnet tights. Well, this was certainly not a uniform, but a formal ninja garb called chainmail. It was a highly defensive garment and a common ninja attire. I made a mistake. Try again. Uchiha Chi blushed, quickly stuffing his pantyhose into his pocket and rummaging around again. This time, he finally pulled out the real thing. It was a sword without a hilt, a straight handle, hidden in a jet black scabbard. Uchiha Chi grasped the hilt and gave it a slight pull. A dazzling cold light flashed. The shivering blade, like autumn water, revealed itself in the sunlight, its sharpness capable of cleaving hair. His brows twitched, and the more he looked at the sword, the more familiar it looked. Wasn't this the Kusanagi sword that the future Nishikuni wielded? Sharp and strong, it had once etched the legend of the Kusanagi sword, the Chidori sword, in Nishikuni's hands. It had slashed thieves and stabbed Uchiha Madara, but it disappeared after the battle with Uchiha Madara. The scabbard had fallen into the lava during the battle with Kaguya Otsutsuki, turning to ash. It could be said that this was a ninja katana surpassing all existing chakra-forged metals, an indestructible sword capable of perfectly channeling chakra. But what puzzled Uchiha Chi was this sword, which should have been in Orochimaru's possession, had been placed inside the scroll sent by the Uchiha clan. But now was not the time to dwell on such questions. He dismissed these distracting thoughts. Now that he had obtained the Murakami sword, he had closed the gap in ninja tools with Maingetsu Kizuki. Now, a true sword fight must begin. It was time to speak with the sword. Uchiha Chi's eyes flashed, and he slung the scabbard around his waist. With a backhand, he drew the Kusanagi sword, the barbed hilt resting in his palm. His fingers danced, unleashing a dazzling, cool sword flower. His heart suddenly ignited, transforming into power. He activated the localized fire-style chakra mode from his heart to his right hand. A surge of fire attribute chakra poured into this divine weapon, channeling all chakra. This was unlike the Kusanagi sword, Chidori, formed by Sasuke's lightning release technique. The next moment, from hilt to blade, the entire blade erupted in a dancing, unceasing flame. Blazing red and white flames intertwined, sparks ignited, and a storm surged. The scorching flames engulfed the cold-edged longsword, transforming it into the Kusanagi sword, the Flame Tachi. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 109 Extreme Copy, Hellfire Dragon Fire. Mist shrouded the buildings, a white mist slowly swirling around the battlefield. Lakes, ruins, broken wood, shattered tiles, and behind them, a fierce battle erupted. Distant cries and howls echoed through the mist. Birds flitted in panic, the daylight chilled, and pale shadows refracted, illuminating the battlefield. Amidst the devastation, two warriors drew their swords, each pursuing their own goals. It was a scene straight out of the ukiyo-e painting. The Senyukian family rescues Minamoto no Tamatoshi. Uchiha Chi closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and gripped the blazing Kusanagi sword tightly with both hands, clearing the pent-up energy from his lungs. He reversed his grip, resting the sword on his arm, and lunged forward, gathering his strength. Suddenly, his eyes opened, revealing a pair of crimson pupils, two pitch-black magatama beads reflecting his opponent's every move. Across from him, Hazuki Maingetsu licked his lips, raised his ninja sword, and stood ready, his gaze as if stalking prey. Without a word, the two charged at once, their flaming sword and massive blade slicing in sharp arcs before clashing. Clang. Blades clashed, sparks flew. Uchiha Chi immediately drew his sword and leaped back, allowing Hiraine to swing down. He then unleashed his flaming sword, extending its blade and stabbing it towards Hazuki Maingetsu's heart. In this moment of crisis, Hazuki Maingetsu remained calm. He instantly kicked Hiraine to block the blazing sword strike, then channeled his chakra into Hiraine, severing the fiery blade. Then, gripping the hilt with both hands, he swung his ninja sword and slashed diagonally downwards, aiming for Uchiha Chi's waist, intending to cleave him in two. Uchiha Chi turned his head quickly, his crimson eyes flashing a single line as he instantly detected his opponent's intention. He sidestepped, blocking the blow, letting the Hiraine flounder slice through his shoulder and abdomen. He reversed his grip on the Kusanagi sword and immediately swung it horizontally. He intended to plunge the sword directly into his opponent's kidney, igniting him into a blaze of flames. A look of surprise crossed Hazuki Maingetsu's eyes. He twisted his hips, switching from a chop to a retreat, allowing Uchiha Chi's sword to graze the broad Hiraine flounder in his hand. A sharp whirlwind sound erupted at the junction of the blades. And all this happened in the blink of an eye. Every strike, every sword blow, was aimed at the opponent's death. Soon, two flashes of blade light traced cold crescents in the white mist, and the sound of clang 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 continued incessantly. Splashes of blood flew up, all of it Uchiha Chi's blood. He paid no heed to the wounds inflicted by Hazuki Maingetsu's blows. He only attacked, never defended, constantly intimidating his opponent with his sword style. He only needed one strike, just one strike to damage Kitano Manayu, and the battle would be decided. Kitano Manayu's eyes jumped. Uchiha Chi's fighting style felt very familiar to him. Then, Uchiha Chi slashed again. Kitano Manayu pulled out a flat eye flounder that had pierced Uchiha Chi's abdomen, raised his sword to block the flaming sword, and quickly stepped back. A streak of cold sweat ran down his forehead. The more he fought, the more frightened he became. The more he fought, the more he wanted to curse. Because the boy before him was using exactly his own moves. The reason their Kitano sword's secret swordsmanship had remained unreplicated for so many years was that it was used in conjunction with the Kitano family's unique water transformation technique. Through water transformation, they ignored physical attacks, attacking without defense, and were more than twice as sharp as ordinary swordsmanship. And this boy before him was actually using his own impenetrable flesh as a water transformation technique, also attacking without defense. He was using the same swordsmanship he'd used during their previous encounter at the castle. Clearly, all of his skills had been copied by that evil brat, using those wicked Sharingan eyes. This was outrageous. Hazuki Maingetsu gritted his teeth, groaning inwardly. Uchiha Chi, on the other hand, clenched his trembling jaws, his entire body trembling with pain. But he could only keep his eyes wide open, his face grimacing as he swung his sword. He had no other options. After all, his swordsmanship was only at the entry level. To compete with Hazuki Maingetsu, he could only use his eyes to completely copy his movements. Like a madman, he constantly used his various injuries to feed his own attacks. He quickly charged forward again, swordsmanship in hand. Hazuki Maingetsu delivered a stunning blow, severing Uchiha Chi's calf. Then, with a sweeping blow from his Hiraine no Katsuki, he swatted Uchiha Chi away like a fly. slammed into the air with such force, Uchiha Chi's face, chest, head, and even his limbs were deformed. Puff. Wow, Uchiha Chi violently vomited a large mouthful of blood, feeling dizzy and seeing stars. Suddenly, a subtitle floated before his eyes, causing him to frown. You've mastered Hazuki Ryu sword technique, beginner, B. At that moment, Uchiha Chi's mind was filled with a sudden enlightenment. A Hazuki Manryu figure appeared in his mind, rehearsing Hazuki Ryu sword techniques. Each move, each form, formed a coherent sword movement, a complete and structured set of moves. It was as if he could predict the next strike, how Meigetsu Hazuki would strike, how he would change his moves after striking, and how Meigetsu would react with his Hazuki Ryu swordsmanship if he thrust his sword. Uchiha Chi's eyes suddenly lit up. He twisted his body in midair and landed on the ground. Enduring the pain, he repaired his injuries while swinging his sword twice. With these two gestures, the light in Uchiha Chi's eyes shone even brighter. Feeling the tingling and pain creeping through his body, he suddenly broke into a sinister grin, baring his teeth as he declared, Meigetsu Hazuki, I see through you completely. The next moment, clutching the hilt of his sword, he swooped down, his hands and feet crawling on the ground, shouting, it's time to end this. Meigetsu Hazuki's eyes trembled as he watched Uchiha Chi, his head covered in blood, his severed leg rapidly repairing itself, a dark, sinister figure crawling and twisting across the ground as he charged. At that moment, he couldn't fathom what this man was up to. As he crawled forward, his left leg had already reattached itself. Uchiha Chi leaped high, unsheathed the Kusanagi sword from his mouth, swung his hand, and unleashed a flaming blade, grasping the hilt with both hands as he spun and slashed down. High in the sky, a cloud flow, descended. Hazuki Meigetsu narrowed his eyes and sneered, cloud flow swordsmanship? But Alice, it won't work on me, it won't fool me. He swung his hearing flounder and was about to raise his blade to block, but Uchiha Chi suddenly switched mid-air, switching from cloud flow to Uchiha style. He swiftly unleashed a bright, shimmering arc, as brilliant as the sun. Uchiha style, instant sky slash. Hazuki Meigetsu's face changed drastically, realizing he couldn't react in time to the blow. Can I just turn it into water? He cried out inwardly, urging his body to dissolve the incoming blow. With a cold flash of his eyes, he raised his blade and slashed, intending to use this opportunity to chop off Uchiha Chi's hands. However, the Uchiha smirked. He suddenly tugged at the index and pinky finger of his left hand, stretching two jet black threads from beneath the water's surface. He tugged at the threads, deflecting his downward momentum mid-air and spinning. He hurled the flaming Kusanagi sword with all his might. Damn it! Take this! A magnetic field spinning at 990,000 HP. A powerful, flying sword technique. Kitano Manryu stared in astonishment, wondering what kind of sword technique is this? You're just a sneak attack. However, this strike was as swift as Hawaii's arrow, indescribably fast. In a flash of fire, it was already close before his eyes. It was about to pierce his chest, piercing his heart. Kitano Manryu gritted his teeth and raised his eyes, only managing to deflect the strike slightly, preventing it from hitting a vital area. At this moment, he couldn't even think about rehydrating. Uchiha Chi, already nearing the surface, saw this, his eyes brightening. He stretched his fingers. Crack, 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 crack. The threads he had silently laid stretched out instantly, like a forest of blades. They twisted and tightened, encircling Hazuki Meigetsu, whose sizzling, smoke-smoking Nagi sword pierced his shoulder. Then, Uchiha Chi formed hand seals, Sichen Mao Yin. With his index finger raised, Uchiha Chi bared his teeth and sneered, you lose. Hazuki Meigetsu, fire style, dragon fire jutsu. The next moment, threads pierced through his body, and hellfire dragonfire erupted. Faced with this raging dragonfire, Hazuki Meigetsu, with his last remaining resistance gone, opened his eyes wide, a look of horror on his face. This Kurigakure genius, a cage-level figure. Finally, Uchiha Chi had broken him to his knees. At that moment, a subtitle suddenly appeared before Uchiha Chi's eyes, dang, the fight is over. The next chapter will advance the plot. We're about to start working on the artificial tailed beast balls and Gundams. Godfathers, it's the end of the month, come count the votes. Chapter 110 Intermission, Righteousness. Uchiha Chi took a few deep breaths. Watching Hazuki Mainjutsu engulfed by the dragon fire jutsu's flames, his eyes betrayed no triumphant joy. Instead, he was exhausted, bewildered by the prospect of what lay ahead. By this point, he had exhausted all his strength. His chakra was dwindling, and the reserves of the small zero tail in his abdomen had been completely drained. He was forced to halt his forbidden technique, flesh transformation. The partially repaired wound in his abdomen continued to bleed profusely as his immortality slowly healed. Uchiha Chi's face paled visibly. In 5 days, he had gone from a cannon fodder genin, a mere fireball jutsu unable to even activate his Sharingan, to his current state through desperate, suicidal pursuits. But now, after achieving immortality, he was nothing more than a difficult, somewhat specialized genin. In this third Shinobi World War, where countless legendary figures appeared and disappeared, he was barely a pillar of strength. But what next? What should they do next? Puff, a black-robed figure vomited a pool of blood mixed with a dense swarm of parasitic insects. A water dragon hurled him high into the air, landing at Uchiha Chi's feet. Ahem, Aburame Ryoma struggled to his feet and stood silently before Uchiha Chi. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had come with a solemn promise to protect this brat. After all, according to his intelligence, he and Yagura were both elite genin. Even if they couldn't defeat him, at least a fight shouldn't be a problem. But he had never expected the leader of the Kurigakure genin squad to be so formidable. His chakra flowed like nothing, and his mastery of water and wind jutsu was unbelievable. At that moment, Aburame Ryoma, his black robe tattered to shreds by Yagura, looked somewhat disheveled. While this root leader boasted of his strength, the future fourth Mizukage of Kurigakure was clearly even more formidable. After a long silence and adjusting his mentality, Aburame Ryoma spoke in a muffled voice, Uchiha Chi, my mission is to bring you to Orochimaru. Under the surface of this water, there are already all my parasitic insects. Later, I will use the secret technique, Insect Swamp, to destroy everything here, and you, take this opportunity to escape. Immediately go to the Rain Country camp and report to your teacher. Aburame Ryoma was silent for a moment, then said, if possible, please tell him to take care of Shiguro who will replace me to enter the route. Uchiha Chi frowned slightly, shook his head immediately, and interrupted him coldly, don't play this kind of self-sacrifice trick in front of me, and I'm not interested in helping you, don't you understand yet? Today, if we don't fight to the last moment, none of us can get away. As he spoke, the water surface burning with dragon fire in front of him surged. A bizarre ninja sword tore through the sea of flames, revealing its true form, a deep blue, barbed, fish-shaped blade, its massive fangs and long tongue, its hilt composed of closed barbs. Samehoda. Then, Hazuki Mainjutsu suddenly rose to his feet, stepping on a massive water monster the size of a building. A ferocious look etched across his face covered in burns. With one hand gripping his ninja sword and the other clutching the 7 ninja swords summoning scroll, he stared intently at Uchiha Chi. For a moment, a murderous aura filled the air. Uchiha Chi pulled back the thread, drew back the Kusanagi sword, and gripped it in his hand. His gaze sternly declared, the only way to survive is to stall until their pursuers arrive, and the pursuers are ninja hunters. Aburame Ryoma fell silent. The Suinin, or Kurigakure's full name, Hidden Ninja Pursuit Unit, were committed to leaving no one alive during their missions. Furthermore, they had no habit of sparing the lives of prisoners from the enemy villages. Killing them was as normal to them as drinking water. Delaying until the Suinin arrived might offer a way to survive, but it was more likely a dead end. Tisk, Aburame Ryoma knew Uchiha Chi was telling the truth. The secret technique, Mushima, would be significantly less effective against a water-based ninja. But he couldn't help but frown, feeling a little unhappy. The way you talk is really Uchiha, you are so ruthless to expose your senior. Uchiha Chi turned his head to look at this stranger root powerhouse. He was silent for a moment, and suddenly smiled confidently. Compared to your immature suggestion, I still have one last trick, although I don't really want to use it, but it should help you get a chance to escape. So, help me take Seiichiro away. Then, Uchiha Chi raised the Kusanagi sword in his hand and glanced at it. He frowned, looked up at Aburame Ryoma and asked, is this the gift Orochimaru gave me for becoming my apprentice? It's quite valuable. It would be a pity if it disappeared with me. Here you go. After speaking, Uchiha Chi casually threw the Kusanagi sword in his hand to Aburame Ryoma. Aburame Ryoma was stunned, taking the Kusanagi sword with a puzzled look on his face. He couldn't help but look up at Uchiha Chi, who was looking bewildered, and asked, wait, What are you going to do? He admitted that the brat was powerful, but at this point, what else could he possibly have? Even if he was incredibly tough, after a battle of that magnitude, his body must be on the verge of collapse, right? Uchiha Chi didn't explain, simply waving his hand. Then, he raised his head and took a deep breath. He walked alone to the center of the battlefield, towards the future fourth Mizukage of the Mizuki, Yagura Karachi. Yagura watched the blood-soaked boy approaching, his eyes narrowed slightly, keenly observing that his body's repair speed was no longer as fast as it used to be. Had this brat also reached his limit? Immediately, he shook his head and said regretfully, "Kid, you are a good opponent, but it's a pity that you haven't grown up yet, so, whether it is for justice or to eliminate future threats." Yagura raised his hook stick, smiled slightly, but his tone was very cold. "I will kill you here." Uchiha Chi took a deep breath and sneered coldly. "Justice?" He raised his hand coldly, pointing to the tragic scene of the Kyanlai's kingdom, and asked harshly, "What you call justice is the scene under your feet. Wives and children are separated, floods are raging, and homes are broken. Listen to these wailings. Won't your conscience be uneasy about this?" Yagura raised his head, and a trace of reluctance rose on his face and he was slightly moved. In order to capture him, the third Mizukage actually performed a large-scale ninjutsu in this kind of civilian gathering place, like a madman. After knowing that this was a disaster caused by himself, Yagura's heart was obviously not as calm as it seemed. But he quickly forced himself to calm down and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry about this, but this is what you have to endure and bear when you rise up for justice, and I've long been prepared." At this point, Yagura's eyes seemed to gleam with a light brighter and more dazzling than the sun. He said firmly, "This is the way the world is. So-called ninjas are nothing more than individuals struggling in a cycle of suffering. No one can save everyone. For every child living in the sun, there must be a beggar dancing with rats in the sewers. But even so, I will protect what I cherish, even if it means thousands of miles of desolate graves and thousands of people shedding blood. Even if I am an unforgivable sinner, I will create a new mist so that it can see the light of day again. This is my ninja way." Upon hearing these words, Uchiha Chi clenched his fists and fell silent for a moment. Could he say Yagura was wrong? What right did he have to criticize Yagura? Why was the world like this? So, in the final analysis, why was he, a man without answers, brought to this world? And given the title of a tough guy sent from heaven, in the hope that he would save this world without definite answers? Everyone was right, in their own standpoints, in the ninja ways they pursued, on the road of harming the innocent, on the road of making the world dance to their will, on the road of ninjutsu machine guns piercing each other's chests, on this road of killing each other. Yagura looked at Uchiha Chi coldly and scolded him in a cold voice. "Are you feeling sorry for them? Are you pitying them? Are you spreading your saintly heart? Don't be naive. You are a Konoha ninja. In this third Shinobi world war that affected the entire ninja world, you are also an executioner. How many fewer civilians have you Konoha ninjas killed than us in Kurigakure? Find it clear, kid. From what standpoint are you questioning me?" Uchiha Chi shook his head. As expected, he couldn't understand these things, and he had no answers. However, Uchiha Chi raised his head and smiled provocatively, then looked at Yagura fiercely and scolded, "You ask about my position. Listen carefully. I am an uncultured, greedy and lustful bastard, but that doesn't prevent someone from doing uncultured things in front of me, which will make me feel unhappy, like to blame disasters for others and benefit yourself." Uchiha Chi raised his chin, and a pair of sharp and breathtakingly sharp Sharingan flashed. Looking coldly at Yagura, he shouted loudly, "Yagura, Kiruji, you'd better kill me here, otherwise, I will make you regret it immediately. If you can still live to the future after that, live to overthrow the existing 5 major countries, unify the entire ninja world, and end this painful cycle, I will be the first." Uchiha Chi's red eyes suddenly shrank, and he bared his teeth and said word by word, "Destroy the water country, raise the hidden mist village." As soon as these words came out, everyone present began to doubt whether they had heard it wrong. Aburin Ryoma, dazed, clutching his Kusanagi sword, Hazuki Mainjutsu, standing atop the water monster, glaring down in anger, a group of masked root ninjas, looking up in astonishment, Kiradachi Yagura, Terumi Mei, and a Kurigakure ninja, running towards them, wearing a Ford protector adorned with 4 water patterns and a pristine blue button. Everyone, for a moment, put aside their pride and prejudice. At such arrogant words, they all looked at the imp before them. Their eyelids twitching, their gazes trembling. There's one more chapter, a little later. As I said in the previous chapter, the fight ends there. Don't panic, Godfathers. I looked back and it's a bit disjointed. Seeing so many people in the comments liking the slapstick, I wrote a bit more, but it seems to have backfired. Let's keep things on track from now on. TWT. Actually, the first part lacks a bit of foreshadowing, which is why it seems a bit labored. I'll fix that later. I'll revise it when I have time. That's all. Love you all, and always listen to advice. Lost Volume. Chapter 111 Mysterious Scroll, Fog Hidden Shocking Changes. Everyone on the field stared in astonishment at the young man who had uttered such arrogant words. But the most shocked was the Root's deputy commander, Aburame Ryoma. Overthrowing the 5 great nations and unifying the entire ninja world, this vision reminded the older Aburame Ryoma of a terrifying being. Though many had forgotten the terror of the Chura as time passed and history turned to history, Aburame Ryoma, having dedicated himself to the dark side of the ninja world, understood the true nature of darkness. The same vision, the same hairstyle, the indelible paranoia in his Sharingan, and this completely unreasonable power. Just looking at his initial form, he could easily be the next, the Shura of the ninja world. Uchiha Madara. Yet, Aburame Ryoma didn't feel the same chill from this young man that simply reading the Shura's blood-soaked profile would have made his hair stand on end. Instead, standing behind him, he felt an indescribable sense of security. They were root ninjas, shadowy beings willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of their mission. Yet, even in this suffocating darkness, unexpectedly, a young man stood before him, saying, "I will help you escape." He even offered him a priceless sacred artifact. It was the Kusanagi sword. At that moment, Aburame Ryoma swallowed, his gaze wavering for some unknown reason. He gripped the Kusanagi sword tightly, gritted his teeth, and his entire body trembled uncontrollably. At that moment, the group of root ninjas standing behind him shared the same gaze, the same state. They had clearly come to rescue this young man, but why? Why had the tables turned now? How could this disciple of the Sannin, a young man with such a promising future, stand before them without hesitation? Before such beings, their hands bloody and filthy and rotting? Why did this backside of his feel so warm, like the bright, blazing sun of spring? Simply standing behind him seemed to cleanse their sinful souls. Unlike these root ninjas, Madarumi, standing nearby, gazed worriedly at Uchiha Chi. A vague sense of foreboding gripped her, as if she were going to lose this young man today. At this moment, Uchiha Chi stared intently at Yagura Kujira, his eyes tracking Meijetsu Kazuki's movements nearby. He understood that while Yagura had caused this disaster, he wasn't the true culprit. While Yagura bore some responsibility, hiding in Tangayan City and leading to the attack by the Chunin, the true perpetrators of this disaster were the Chunin, the third Mizukage behind them. It was these people who truly disregarded human life, and it angered him. And it was these people he targeted. Uchiha Chi waited, suppressing his anger, controlling his emotions. He was almost unable to contain himself. Everything he had fought and created so far, all the noise and activity, had been an attempt to buy time, to attract attention, to await the arrival of this group. He still had one final weapon. The flooded city beneath his feet. The darkness of its inhabitants. Their injustice, their anger, their sorrow, their wailing, their despair. Their justice. It will be carried out by Uchiha Chi. The cries of this city's inhabitants will transform into terrifying chakra that even the little zero tail cannot withstand. The price of this will be the bursting of the little zero tail, his entire body. But that moment of brilliance will inflict upon these murderers an unforgettable pain for the rest of their lives. On the field. After a brief moment of surprise, Kardachi Yagura shook his head, a hint of fear rising in his eyes. The words sounded childish, something about overthrowing the 5 great nations, like childish boasting, but yet they inexplicably filled him with a subtle sense of unease, as if a bug were crawling up his back. Yagura took a deep breath, intending to strike immediately, to utterly annihilate the brat before him. However, at that moment, a Kurigakure ninja, wearing a forward protector emblazoned with 4 water patterns and a wisp of blue hair in a bun, glanced at Uchiha Chi in astonishment before recovering his composure and rushing over, shouting, "Master Yagura!" Huh? Yagura froze, then turned back in surprise. He recognized the young man as his junior in the Jounin squad, Ao. Expert in perceptive ninjutsu, a bit nostalgic and austere, he was a reliable companion. "Please look at this, Ao." His face filled with anxiety, hurried over, pulling out a scroll and handing it to Yagura. Yagura frowned slightly. Was there anything he couldn't do after dealing with this brat? But being good-tempered, he didn't want to say anything. He tiptoed to take the scroll from Ao's hand and unfolded it. At a glance, Yagura's eyes widened. How is this possible? He suddenly raised his head and looked at Qing, surprised, and asked, Qing, are you sure this is true? Qing nodded fiercely, anxious like an ant on a hot pan, and immediately asked, Lord Yagura, what should we do? We must act immediately. War waits for no one. Yagura took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping over Uchiha Chi in front of him, his eyes struggling slightly. If he gave up on killing this brat now, and really waited for him to grow up, it might cost a terrible price to destroy him. But over at Midorima Reef, Yagura pondered for a moment, then made an immediate decision. He raised his head and looked at Madarumi and Meijetsu Azuki, no longer caring about the forces and power behind them. He said sternly, you two, there must be a limit to your willfulness. I'm saying this for the last time. Now, follow me to the main island of Kirigakure. Meijetsu Kazuki and Madarumi were stunned for a moment. Before they could come to their senses, Yagura threw the scroll to Meijetsu Kazuki. Then, he walked in front of Madarumi, less than 1 meter and 5 tall, staring at her expressionlessly like a little adult. Madarumi, Madarumi blinked, and immediately cold sweat broke out on her back. Her impulsive act of helping Uchiha Chi could even be considered treason if examined closely, but Lord Yagura himself was currently in a state of both defection and non-defection. So perhaps, it wasn't a problem. He stared at Madarumi for a long time. Finally, Yagura shook his head and said helplessly, Little princess, the love game is over. I need your help contacting the Elder Master. Now, go say goodbye to your boyfriend. The next time we meet, you'll be true enemies. At this moment, Uchiha Chi also sensed something was amiss. Why did the expressions of the two people across from him suddenly change? It was as if they were instantly distracted by something more important. Wait, what scroll were they reading? Did they want to kill him anymore? Besides, I'd been waiting for this long for the ninja chase. Where were they? After all this time and all this commotion, even if you were running a marathon, you should be in place by now. At this thought, Uchiha Chi's brows jumped, realizing that things weren't going to be simple. His eyes immediately fixed on the scroll in Hazuki Manayu's hand. Something unexpected must have interrupted his suicidal spell. Behind him, Aburame Ryoma, upon seeing Ao arrive, finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then, a sweet smile emerged, a hint of mastery. Then, observing Uchiha Chi's expression of doubt, a long-lost playfulness emerged. Silently, he moved closer to Uchiha Chi's ear and whispered, Junior, do you want to know what's written on that scroll? Uchiha Chi was startled by Aburame Ryoma and turned back, wondering, how come you're walking so quietly? He rolled his eyes at Aburame Ryoma and scoffed, nonsense. That must be a crucial secret. Who wouldn't want to know? Do you think you know what's written on it? Aburame Ryoma smiled faintly, his expression dark, like a worm from hell. Then, he actually reached out and took out an identical scroll and slapped it into Uchiha Chi's hand. He raised his finger to pick up his sunglasses and said in a very sultry tone, Of course I know. If you want to know why, that's because I gave it to them. Chapter 112 opens with a bang and the plot goes wild. Uchiha Chi looked at the scroll in his hand, identical to the one in Hazuki Meijetsu's, his expression slightly contorted. He immediately unrolled it and began to examine its contents. Unfolding it, he revealed a crude map of the ninja world. A path from the land of earth to the land of hot springs and then to the land of water was specially marked. Along the way, at points crossing the small lands of iron, field, and grass, a paragraph was thoughtfully noted containing estimated troop numbers and information on the leading high-ranking ninja. Finally, a heavy red circle marked Midorima Reef, the final line of defense between the coastline of Hot Springs and the main island of Kirigakure in the land of water. Interspersed within the scroll were other ninja profiles. Maji, Huaguang, Daishi, and Huangtu, all powerful genin from the Iwagakure village. Uchiha Chi had a vague impression that the first three had participated in the Battle of Shinobi Bridge, while the latter, Huangtu, the son of the third Tsuchika Jinoki and the father of the future Hokage, had left a deep impression on Uchiha Chi in the original story. Upon seeing this scroll, Uchiha Chi took a deep breath. Everything made sense. No wonder the chasing ninja abandoned the pursuit after unleashing the explosive water wave and remained silent. No wonder Yagura Karachi and Meijet Sakazuki were so nervous upon seeing this information. No wonder. But what chilled Uchiha Chi even more was, he was the one who had caused all this to happen. It was Uchiha Chi, the one who had rewritten the course of this war. The wings of this little butterfly had already unleashed a catastrophic tornado. That night 3 days ago, from the formation of Team C, no, from the moment he left Konoha village, the world had already veered into chaos. The fateful Uchiha Setsuna had survived, temporarily halting the Blood Pond clan's rebellion. Genin, who was supposed to enter the cave and be ambushed by Orochimaru, escaped without a trace. Orochimaru, who was supposed to acquire the forbidden technique of corporeal transformation, was denied this technique, forcing him to face reality and refrain from obsessing over his pursuit of immortality. As a result, Orochimaru, obsessed with immortality, temporarily regained his sense of responsibility as one of the Sannin. After acquiring the forbidden technique, Orochimaru did not plunge headfirst into the laboratory, frantically conducting research using the test subjects provided by Danzo. Instead, he participated in the Third Shinobi World War. Considering the plot on the original novel, the Minato story, where Jiraiya and Minato's team infiltrate Iwagakure, Orochimaru, as the frontline decision-maker and Jiraiya's close friend, would likely have conferred with Danzo to help Jiraiya complete his mission and then released a bombshell to disrupt Iwagakure's actions. This bombshell is the scroll he holds, detailing Iwagakure's movements. This may be the result of Jiraiya's earlier investigations. After delivering this scroll to the turbulent Kurigakure, neither the conservatives nor the reformists within Kurigakure could sit idly by while the Iwagakure forces stormed Midori Reef and attacked Kurigakure headquarters. This supposedly swift, revenge-seeking assault by Iwagakure's elite troops, a blitzkrieg, would, under the manipulations of Orochimaru and Shimura Danzo, devolve into a stalemate. And beneath this action, there must be another, more significant move. It would be a pivotal operation that would change the course of the Third Shinobi World War. Uchiha Chi trembled slightly, his Sharingan unconsciously lighting up, a chill running through his heart. What kind of operation could possibly warrant providing Kurigakure with such crucial information? What exactly was happening in the Land of Rain? Aburin Ryoma, watching Uchiha Chi's expression, was stunned. After hearing this news, shouldn't this boy be happy to be alive? But what was that expression on his face? Why did he look so terrifying? Hey, Uchiha Chi, are you okay? What happened to you? Aburin Ryoma waved his hand in front of Uchiha Chi's face, a look of surprise on his face as he asked with concern. I am fine. Let me think about it. Don't make a noise. However, Uchiha Chi seemed oblivious to the waving hand before him. His tone, initially calm, then rapid, almost shattered. He almost burst into a curse. His lips trembled as he stared intently at the scroll in his hand. His brain was overloaded, trying to extrapolate the future from this basis. What would Konoha do? What would Orochimaru do? What would Danzo do? What would Sarutobi Hiruzen do? At this moment, what on earth were they planning to do? But it was unimaginable. Absolutely unimaginable. His actions affected the decisions of the original characters, and their reactions came back to interrupt his suicidal spell. It was only fair. So, the future was no longer controllable. With the information he had, Uchiha Chi could no longer predict the future. The thought of this made him gasp for air. His eyes widened, the two Magatama in his crimson pupils spinning wildly. His breathing was rapid and labored, a bomb stuck in his throat, ready to explode at any moment. It felt like a giant hand, controlling fate, suddenly reached out and grasped his immortal heart. It squeezed hard. A soul-shaking pain and weakness suddenly surged. How is this possible? Uchiha Chi stumbled back a few steps, his hands trembling as he held the scroll. Fear filled his pupils, and sweat instantly covered his forehead. The Magatama in his Sharingan spun wildly, struggling to transform from 2 to 3, or even evolve into even more beautiful patterns. However, even with the right emotions, his pupil power was insufficient, his physical aptitude was too weak, and he couldn't accumulate enough energy. It had only been 5 days since these eyes had grown from nothing to 2 Magatama. They were no longer able to withstand the higher levels of evolution. Uchiha Chi stumbled back several steps, his mind in a tangle of emotions, unable to even properly control the chakra in his feet. Suddenly, one foot tipped beneath the surface, and immediately, his balance was lost, and he was about to slip and fall. However, amidst the fear of falling, the helplessness and unpredictability that filled him with despair, a clear voice like a silver bell suddenly echoed in his ears. Are you okay? A pair of pure white soft hands slipped between Uchiha Chi's legs and waist, lifting him up in a perfect princess carry. Uchiha Chi's head, which felt like it was about to explode with thought, suddenly rested on a warm cotton ball. The messy thoughts in his head were immediately swept into the trash can by the greater power of LSP, and then packed up and carried away. His thoughts suddenly became clear, and then he raised his head and saw a pair of innocent green eyes blinking. Just like the most beautiful emerald in the world, clear, bright, and a little stubborn. It was so beautiful that people couldn't help but forget all their troubles for a while. Uchiha Chi slightly widened his eyes and subconsciously adjusted his viewing posture. The next second, a hint of exasperation flashed across the pair of clear green eyes. Asshole, what are you rubbing against? Plop. A splash of water burst out. For a moment, the field was filled with the atmosphere of youthful joy. There is still one chapter to be released later. Chapter 113 Farewell and Departure, codenamed Shura. Gurgle, gurgle, cough, cough, ugh. Uchiha Chi choked several times before finally peeping his head out from under the surface. Unnoticed, the lake created by the water-style, great explosion wave height steadily receded, the surface of this miniature ocean dropping to the level of a second-floor building. In the distance, the civilians of the devastated land of hot springs had already begun various rescue operations. Young men, holding ladders and rowing sampans, pulled women and children from rooftops. On the other side, people shouted as they pried open the drainage channel, veins bulging on their foreheads. The hot spring ninjas, leaping across the water, acted as horse heralds, continuously summarizing the disaster situation and reporting it up the chain of command. A dreadfully bloated nobleman, imperiously detaining them, forced them to rescue their own mansion first. Destruction and rebirth, hope and wailing, all coexisted. Watching this unfold, Uchiha Chi fell silent, and at the same time, truly calmed down. He suppressed his mad urge to use the Zero Tail's power to bring justice to the civilians of Tangayan City. The Zero Tail wasn't a righteous ally against evil, on the contrary, it was itself synonymous with evil and darkness. Not to mention the damage draining dark chakra would cause to those inhabitants. To drain the extreme emotions of the entire city, Uchiha Chi would need to constantly move closer to collect them, effectively spreading the aftermath of the battle. In that moment, he would truly become a killer. He would be no different from the ninja chasers and the third Mizukage, who disregarded human life. Just then, "Are you okay?" Terumi crouched down above the water, picked up a stick, and poked Uchiha Chi in the face. "Huh?" Uchiha Chi exhaled, smiled helplessly, and looked up at her. "This time, we really must say goodbye." Terumi stood behind the highly respected elders of the Kirigakure and their bloodline clans, while Mainjutsu Kazuku's supporters were his own ninjas and the Kirigakure's esoteric clans. With the impending battle, Yagura would undoubtedly take both of them, and Terumi had always acted for the future of Kirigakure. Uchiha Chi was silent for a moment, then rummaged through his pockets, finally pulling out an oil-papered object, the Sakuramachi that Terumi had bought him. After such a fierce battle, even with the oil paper wrapping, it was soaked through. Only one piece remained. "Look, it's a little cold, but do you still want to eat?" Uchiha Chi asked sheepishly, holding up the unfolded oil paper and scratching his head. Terumi's gaze fell on the warped, blood-soaked Sakuramachi, a complex expression flickering in her emerald eyes. After this, Uchiha Chi would return to Konoha, and she would return to Kirigakure. They would each pursue their own ninja paths, and the Sakuramachi before her eyes might be their final encounter in that path. Whoa! Looking at the foolish boy falling into the water, she suddenly smiled, like a hibiscus blossom swaying in the spring breeze. "I want to eat it." She reached up to pick up the blood-soaked Sakuramachi, carefully putting it away, her face solemn as if accepting a wedding ring. Then, she stood up, gave Uchiha Chi one last look, wanting to say something more, to promise something, to make some agreement. But she couldn't. For this young woman, who had missed her wedding date in the future to revitalize Kirigakure, the true meaning of a ninja was to endure such emotions, such bitterness, to embark on the ninja path, and then to relentlessly pursue her goal. She sighed, then looked at Uchiha Chi with a complicated expression. "Next time, I will definitely show no mercy. See you on the battlefield in the future." Uchiha Chi was silent for a moment, speechless, before finally nodding silently. Okay, there was no further conversation, except for a final, Fierce glare from Hazuki Mainjutsu. When Uchiha looked back, he grumbled and turned his head away, leaving him puzzled as to what this guy was up to. Soon, the Kurigakure group, led by Yagura, quickly fled the devastated battlefield. At that moment, Aburame Ryoma, who had been standing beside Uchiha as if he didn't exist, glanced at him and said calmly, "You probably still have things to do, only half an hour. I'll meet you outside the city. This concerns your transfer orders, your new mission, and your new role in the route." Uchiha frowned slightly, then nodded. Seeing this, Aburame Ryoma said nothing more and quickly left with the route ninjas. He needed some time to gather the information on the events in Tangain City and what he had seen and heard, and then quickly report to Danzo. Especially this brat, Uchiha. His actual combat power and the unique qualities revealed in this battle were seriously inconsistent with the intelligence recorded in the route. Damn it, are these route ninjas working in intelligence just for fun? Before coming here, the information he had obtained stated that Uchiha was just a weak genin who was obsessed with playing around and only dared to carry out D-rank missions. He was a kid who had the bad luck to be noticed by Orochimaru and accepted as his disciple. But as he soared, Aburame Ryoma couldn't help but glance down. Below him, the ravines and crumbling attics looked like the ruins of a battlefield ravaged by a Force 8 gale. He paused for a moment, then resolved that upon returning to the village, he would make the route ninjas, tasked with gathering intelligence on the Uchiha clan, feel the effects of being rigged. You call this weakness? You call this bad luck? You call this playing with things? Aburame Ryoma felt a sharp pain in his head. He couldn't imagine the fury Danzo would unleash upon his return. Would he cry out, "This must be an Uchiha conspiracy," and attack this Uchiha brat? After saying goodbye, Uchiha still had to manage the affairs of Tangain City, rebuild the underground black market, calculate the losses, and send a bill to Fugaku. Overwhelmed by these troubles, he had no time to deal with his own Seiichiro. Finally, Seiichiro just stared at him and said, "Get out of here. I'm tired of seeing you. Just don't die. Also, when you get to Orochimaru, tell Shisa my regards." Uchiha's face twitched slightly. He wanted to ask him how he knew he was going to the Land of Rain. But then he realized that Seiichiro was in charge of the underground black market, and he felt relieved. Seiichiro was a big shot, after all. Uchiha shook his head, and finally begged Seiichiro to help rescue his little brother, Hiden, who was still buried under a street in Kabukicho. He also asked him not to just give him a couple of steamed buns, but to send someone to keep an eye on him and escort him back to Tangnan village. After receiving Seiichiro's dismissive reply, Uchiha breathed a sigh of relief. He knew Hiden probably had a lot to say, a lot to ask, about immortality, the future, and how he, as a good brother, could save the land of hot springs. But Uchiha's mind was a tangle, and he had no desire to pretend to be a good brother. He didn't know how to explain to Hiden, "Actually, I was just kidding you, so don't take it seriously." He needed to travel to the Land of Rain as soon as possible to determine the extent of his impact on the Third Shinobi World War, who would likely die, and whether the outcome would be irreversible. With these thoughts in mind, as the sun slowly set, painting the sky a dim yellow, Uchiha packed his bags, his gaze fixed. He set out from the city. Finally, in front of a hot spring bathhouse not far from the city, he encountered the middle-aged man, Aburame Ryoma, standing alone, his back turned, gazing at the fading dusk. The dim sunlight shone through the hazy steam rising from the hot springs, creating a dreamlike scene. Aburame Ryoma turned his head, revealing half of his sunglasses, and asked lightly, "You're here?" Uchiha nodded. "Yes, I'm here." Aburame Ryoma didn't even turn his head, and threw a token to Uchiha, saying coldly, "Very good, from today on, you will become a root ninja. No name, no feelings, no past, and no future. Become the big tree that supports Konoha village from behind, and the root deeply rooted in the earth. Remember your code name Shiro." Uchiha blinked and thought to himself, "Brother, are you going to take the postgraduate entrance examination? You are so talkative." His expression twisted slightly, and then he saw, Aburame Ryoma stepped onto the stairs of the hot spring bathhouse, tilted his head, turned his head, pushed up his very sultry sunglasses, and then said coldly, "Sure, what are you still standing there for? Follow me, complete your first mission, rub your boss's back, it's the end of the month, can you give me the expired tickets from your godfathers, humble JPG." Chapter 114, Decapitation Operation in the Rain Country. The setting sun cast a hazy yellow hue, sharply dividing heaven and earth. A gentle breeze blew from the horizon, carrying the coolness of an early spring evening, ruffling the roots of Uchiha Chi's hair. He was stunned. What? The first task of becoming a root ninja was to scrub the boss's back? Being treated like a mule and a pawn on my first day, what kind of workplace bullying was this? Uchiha Chi raised his hand, as if trying to save something. No, wait, I think we at the root should have more urgent tasks to do. However, Aburame Ryoma shook his head and looked back. His eyes under his sunglasses were sharp and penetrating, and he slowly interrupted. Okay, kid, at least here, no one wants to hurt you. You're too tense. You haven't had a good rest for too long. Your body is always on guard, preparing to fight. Even now, Aburame Ryoma looked at Uchiha Chi's tense thighs and the movement of his other hand that always subconsciously rubbed his lower back. Seeing the other person in this state, he sighed. In this state, you won't be able to complete the next task well. Aburame Ryoma turned around, stepped onto the wooden steps in his clogs, and walked towards the white mist drifting from the hot spring bathhouse. You've been in this country for so many days, you shouldn't have soaked in the hot springs in the land of hot springs, right? Come and try it. Uchiha Chi frowned slightly, and for a moment he couldn't figure out what the other person was thinking. He followed closely, past a front desk, and into the changing rooms to change into his yukata. Then, under the guidance of veteran Aburame Ryoma, he took a shower. Finally, as if by some strange coincidence, they both found themselves in the hot springs. Submerging himself in the steaming, white mist-filled pool, Uchiha Chi felt a stark difference from his last experience in the sweltering heat of the Kumagakure Dode. The water was around 43 degrees Celsius, and once inside, his chaotic, high-pressure mind seemed to instantly calm. His face flushed slightly, and he felt every pore open. He slumped beside the pool, unwilling to move. Uchiha Chi turned his head, still looking at Aburame Ryoma beside him with some confusion, and asked, "This seems a little different from the root ninja life I imagined. Besides, isn't it said that root ninjas have no name and no emotions?" Aburame Ryoma leaned against the edge of the pool, raised his hand to pick up a bottle of sake, and took a sip comfortably. He was silent for a while before shaking his head. How can a ninja really lose their emotions? Most root ninjas are the second sons and youngest sons in the family. They have to join the root for the sake of the family, and undergo cruel and inhumane training to become a machine without emotions, who can only swing a knife to kill and complete the task. Just like our Aburame clan, in the future, one of Shihai and Hiwai's children will definitely join the root. There is nothing we can do about it, but I am an exception, and so are you. Uchiha Chi raised his eyebrows slightly, thought for a moment, looked at Aburame Ryoma's age, and understood. The root was founded after Sarutobi Hiruzen became Hokage, and by then, Aburame Ryoma was already a capable ninja. And the root's deputy commander, Aburame Ryoma, was apparently taciturn and preferred to work alone, but in reality, this was a way to hide a side of him that was unknown to the public. Uchiha Chi was silent for a moment, then looked up and asked, "You should know that I am an Uchiha, and the root and the Uchiha do not seem to have such a good relationship, so, why are you telling me all this?" Aburame Ryoma sighed and rubbed his head with some troubled look. Although Orochimaru accepted you as his disciple, he seemed to have agreed to some conditions from that adult, and he had other things to do on the battlefield in the Land of Rain. So, during the operation in the Land of Rain, you were assigned to my subordinates, and I have always been accustomed to acting alone, and I am not good at taking care of the feelings of my subordinates, the village and the family, the root and the Uchiha. To be honest, I haven't thought so much. It's just that from the standpoint of a superior, I hope you can be more honest. This is the first reason." After hearing these words, Uchiha Chi's eyes turned. It seemed that Orochimaru had paid a lot to tie himself to him and obtain the forbidden technique of physical transformation from himself. Then, Aburame Ryoma paused, and after a long silence, he slowly spoke. "Also, if you really must ask why, that's because, I see a different future in you. We, the so-called root ninjas, are a group of nameless people who support peace in the darkness." Aburame Ryoma looked up at the crescent moon rising in the sky, and said with some emotion, "For a group of us, giving up our names, giving up our feelings, giving up our past and future, is not something worth mentioning, but even if it carries darkness, I hope that this power can be used for the right reasons, and the root ninjas, even if they are nameless, should." At this point, Aburame Ryoma suddenly stopped talking, shook his head and said, "Forget it. Why am I telling you this? He reached out to the edge of the pool and took out a scroll, threw it to Uchiha Chi, closed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "This is your next mission." At first, I didn't understand why Orochimaru assigned you to complete such a dangerous mission. Now, I understand a little better, but for you, this mission is still far more dangerous than a normal S-rank mission. Uchiha Chi's expression froze as he snatched the scroll. The green scroll featured a solemn cloud pattern, and the lacquer seal on the scroll's binding bore the official Konoha village emblem. At this moment, Aburame Ryoma opened his eyes and burped with a stern expression. "You only have so much time to rest. Now, memorize the route above, destroy the scroll, and commit these details to memory. I'll explain the mission on the way. Remember to rest well tonight. We'll depart promptly at 8 a.m. tomorrow." With that, Aburame Ryoma stood up, climbed to the edge of the pool, wiped himself with a towel, and headed for the sauna. Soon, Uchiha Chi was alone in the moonlit pool. He glanced at the scroll in his hand, his expression froze. He immediately tore open the lacquer seal and unfolded it with a wave of his hand. Then, he saw a terrifyingly detailed route map. Starting from the Konoha position in the Land of Rain, the scroll circled inward, marking the 4 frontier positions of the Tsunagakure. As if dancing on the edge of a knife, it skirted these positions, penetrating deeper into the Land of Rain, reaching the border of the Land of Earth. Then, it crossed the rock statues at the border of the Land of Earth, passing through a secret natural fortress formed by desolate rock walls and high rocky mountains. Finally, it arrived before the village of Iwagakure in the Land of Earth, a circled rocky canyon perfect for an ambush. The scroll ended with the name and objective of the mission: Rainland Decapitation Operation, Target, the new 4th Kazakage, Rosa. Chapter 115, Attacked from 3 sides, a strategy to break the deadlock. Elsewhere, at the border of the Land of Fire, the defense line of the Land of Rain, the headquarters of the Konoha garrison. Raindrops pattered, hitting the leather of the tent with a muffled thud. The sky was thick with dark clouds, and blue thunder roared with gusts. Inside the military tent, a group of men sat in silence, their foreheads resting on their hands, staring at the intelligence spread out on their desks, their faces solemn. Jiraiya's team, Minato Namikaze, Shikoku Nara, and Mimura Hamaki. The men in the tent were among the elite of Konoha's jonin, their top minds. But at this moment, their expressions were utterly awkward. "Master Jiraiya, are you sure of the authenticity of this information?" Nara Shikoku, the military advisor, draped in a deerskin coat and sporting a pineapple-like hairstyle, frowned. He looked up at the head of the tent. There sat a tall man in a red outer coat and a forehead protector with oil-lettered characters. His white hair reached his waist, and 2 red marks stretched down his cheeks from under his eyelids. He stood at least 1.9 meters tall. This man was none other than Jiraiya, one of the 3 ninjas. Jiraiya scratched his head in confusion, sighed and said, "It has been confirmed that Sans Village will join forces with Iwagakure to declare war on Konoha together. We just have to wait for the envoy to the Land of Earth to reach an agreement with the 3rd Tsuchikage, and this matter will be completely settled." After confirming this information again, Nara Shikoku took a deep breath and analyzed with a very grim expression. "In this case, the village will be attacked by both sand and rock on the battlefield in the Land of Rain. In addition, the information from the Land of Field, which is on the border between the Land of Fire and Thunder, is also not good. In addition, the village of Kirigakure has ended the war with Sand Village. If this goes on, we will at least be attacked by sand, rock, and cloud. In the more extreme case, we will be attacked from all sides. You may not be unfamiliar with what this means. Everyone here has witnessed what the Second Shinobi World War was like. What will be the final outcome of the Land of Rain, which is attacked on 3 sides?" As soon as these words came out, everyone present was startled, and looking at the information on the table was even more shocking. During the Second Shinobi World War, the Land of Rain, overestimating its own strength, attempted to become the 6th great ninja kingdom. Ultimately, attacked from 3 sides, it was utterly devastated and remains on the brink of extinction. Konoha was stronger than the Land of Rain, but if attacked from all 4 sides simultaneously, they would honestly not be able to withstand such a ferocious attack. Just 3 days after the 3rd Shinobi World War erupted, bad news arrived one after another. Now, the fuse had finally been lit, with such a devastating bombshell. Everyone in the room was silent. For Konoha, the 3rd Shinobi World War would be more horrific than any previous war. So horrific that even their children could be thrust into the fray. The thought of such a possibility captivated Mimura Yamaki, who was seated at the table. He stood up and eagerly asked, "Jiraiya-sama, is there no way to prevent this?" This was the question everyone in the room wanted to ask. As he spoke, they all looked up at Jiraiya, seated at the head of the table. Even Jiraiya's direct disciple, Minato Namikaze, standing beside him, glanced sideways. Under everyone's gaze, Jiraiya remained silent for a moment, then raised his head, his gaze fixed outside the tent. He took a deep breath and promised, "Of course, to deal with this situation, the village has already sent a reliable team, and they've formulated a plan called Rain Country Decapitation Operation. I've summoned you all here to refine this plan and facilitate this decapitation operation." Then, Jiraiya looked outside the tent, his eyes fixed. "The Sannin and his disciples will be the core executors of this operation. Kill the fourth Kazekage, Raza, the envoy sent by Tsunagakure to form an alliance with Iwagakure." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone in the room was stunned. Not only were they shocked by the fact that the Tsunagakure village had sent the fourth Kazekage to ensure the success of the alliance, but also by Jiraiya's previous words. The Sannin and his disciples were going to assassinate the fourth Kazekage, Raza. Upon hearing this, everyone's eyes immediately turned to Jiraiya, who looked solemn, and Minato Namikaze, who stood beside him, looking bewildered. Minato Namikaze wore a naive expression, also completely bewildered. He had just retreated from Iwagakure with his master, Jiraiya, and hadn't received any notification from the village. Why was he suddenly being asked to kill Raza? Everyone present smiled knowingly at his expression, thinking, the answer is literally there, and yet you, Minato, are still feigning ignorance? Huh? You're really acting like one, the Sannin and his disciple? Only this master and disciple pair agreed to the conditions, and perhaps they could actually succeed. So the answer could only be. Jiraiya laughed heartily at the glances he received, his eyes fixed intently on the outside of the tent. At that very moment, lightning and thunder roared outside the tent. A pale hand lifted the curtain, and Orochimaru, clad in a pitch-black robe, emerged. He removed his hood and gave a hoarse laugh. "What's up, Jiraiya? Aren't you surprised by my arrival?" Back in the land of hot springs, when Uchiha Chi finished reading the scroll in his hand, his pupils shrank, his mind filled with questions. He thought, why are you, Aburame Ryoma, so reserved? You let him know such bombshell information, and then tell him to get some rest tonight? What a joke. How the hell am I supposed to sleep after you've finished talking to me about this? Uchiha Chi leaped to his feet, threw on his bathrobe, grabbed the scroll, and rushed to the sauna. He had so much to understand about this mission. Why was he sent on this mission? Why was Raza the envoy sent by Tsunagakure? When did Raza become the fourth Kazekage? And how would this affect the subsequent course of this war? Question after question gnawed at Uchiha Chi, making him desperate for answers. This impulsiveness propelled him to kick open the sauna door and bark at his sullen, misty boss, Aburame Ryoma. Tell me the answer now. Aburame Ryoma had clearly anticipated Uchiha Chi's reaction. He sat lost in thought on a bench in the sauna, several towels neatly stacked in a basin at his feet. The fog over his sunglasses didn't stop him from glancing up at Uchiha Chi. Then, he said quietly, I knew it. Uchiha men are just so rude, kid. This is my first lesson as a boss. Want to know the answer? Aburame Ryoma tilted his head, pushed up his rather sultry sunglasses, and a sinister grin crossed his face. He grabbed a towel from the basin at his feet and tossed it toward Uchiha Chi. Then, with a chuckle, he said, first, correct your address. Then, earn your respect with some hard work. He glanced at the pristine white towel in his hand, then looked up at Aburame Ryoma, who was grinning sinisterly in front of him, with little bugs occasionally crawling around his back and ears. Uchiha Chi fell silent. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 116, Death Mission. This wave, even Jesus can't stop me. The night was as dark as water, the sky dotted with stars, the Milky Way hanging like a streak of light. Uchiha Chi lay sprawled on the bed in the guest room of the hot spring resort, a pile of papers piled high in front of him. Under the bed lay a mess of crumpled papers, covered in diagrams and charts that only Uchiha Chi could understand. Just now, after a numbing labor, he had finally obtained the information he sought from Aburame Ryoma. Uchiha Chi had a general understanding of the current situation on the battlefield in the Land of Rain. Although the process was unpleasant, the information Aburain Ryoma provided was quite detailed. First, there was the village of Sunagakure. After the long-standing skirmishes and minor wars with the village of Mist that had lasted until the eve of the Third Shinobi World War, two young warriors who had distinguished themselves in those wars had become candidates for the position of fourth Kazakage, Raza and Hagura. At this point, the village of Sunagakure had declared war on Konoha and was gathering forces to invade the Land of Fire. In preparation for this war, they were eager to immediately end the conflict with Karigakure to avoid fighting on two fronts. As a hero of Sunagakure, Hagura was supposed to be sold to Karigakure by Raza and the Sunagakure leadership as a condition for a ceasefire. However, Orochimaru and Denzo intervened, selling intelligence on the Iwagakure forces, who were about to take advantage of Karigakure. The Karigakure elders, upon receiving this information, called a halt to the war with Sunagakure the day before. That same day, Raza, having failed to sell out his teammates, took on the dangerous task of acting as an envoy to join Iwagakure in the fight against Konoha. This move secured his candidacy for the 4th Kazakage. Meanwhile, word from Sunagakure confirmed that they would depart in 2 weeks, with the 4th Kazakage himself as an envoy to demonstrate Sunagakure's sincerity, to the Land of Earth to negotiate an alliance with the 3rd Tsuchikage, Anoki. These were all the prerequisites for this decapitation operation. Shinobi wars, like battles, are fought on first-hand intelligence. This was true for Sunagakure, this was true for Konoha, and this was true for Uchiha Chi as well. Upon hearing this news, Uchiha Chi finally breathed a sigh of relief. While it seemed his actions had significantly impacted the course of the war, after borrowing a pen and paper from the innkeeper overnight and drawing and analyzing the situation, he concluded that, at least for now, the impact on the future plotline wasn't significant. Uchiha Chi had merely saved a few doomed men, and the course of the war wouldn't differ much from the original novel. The future would proceed as planned, except that Karigakure had managed to retain more manpower due to their escape from a surprise attack from Iwagakure. But that didn't matter. Even if Karigakure had conserved more strength, they couldn't defeat the true mastermind behind the war, Uchiha Madara. Orochimaru joined the war because he didn't possess the forbidden technique, flesh transformation, and he did this to obtain it. Uchiha Chi pondered for a moment, then tapped the tip of his pen firmly on the words Rain Country Decapitation Operation. He also linked his name and Orochimaru's to this mission. Assassinating the 4th Kazakage, Raza, may seem crucial, but in reality, this mission lacks sincerity. It's a mission that's certain to end in death. Uchiha Chi frowned and muttered a series of outrages, completely dismissing the mission's legitimacy. Assassinating Raza was meaningless. Even if you were killed and the blame was placed on the other ninja villages, it wouldn't change the overall situation. Orochimaru and Denzo's goal had been achieved after leaking the information to Karigakure. Whether Iwagakure agreed to an alliance or not, the war would inevitably be delayed on the water country battlefield. Orochimaru had bought Konoha time to adjust to the intensity of the war. And once Iwagakure was free, they would still attack Konoha from the rain and grass countries. This war was inevitable. After all, the Third Shinobi World War was a tacit invasion of the Fire Country by the 4 great nations. As for this mission, what could one say? Uchiha Chi saw it as a pure lottery-based operation. His beloved master, Orochimaru, wanted his body. That was why he'd created this mission, all to send him to the most dangerous battlefield. He longed for Uchiha Chi to die quickly, so Orochimaru could retrieve his body for dissection and scientific research. And Denzo, the Pot King, really just wanted a chance to win a prize. As for the outcome, if it succeeded, that was good. It would dampen the Sand Village's fighting spirit and force them to bring in a 5th-generation leader overnight. If it failed, that didn't matter. It would only cost him an Uchiha who had nothing to do with Shimura Denzo. This was a completely fatal mission. In front of him stood Raza, a genuine cage-level expert. Behind him stood his master, Orochimaru, gazing intently at him, ready to backstab him at any moment. To his left stood Denzo Shimura, his sworn enemy, who had long held a grudge against the Uchiha clan. To his right stood the battlefield of the Land of Rain, a war at full blast, a meat grinder. In the middle, sandwiched between them stood Uchiha Chi, a man desperate for death. Thinking of this, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but let out a smirk. This wave. Half my body is already stuffed into the morgue. Even Jesus can't stop me. A flicker of excitement flashed in Uchiha Chi's eyes. He jumped out of bed, gathered the papers he'd been analyzing all night, and then, with a hand seal, unleashed a massive fireball, incinerating them all to ash. Bed, sleep, Uchiha Chi couldn't wait for tomorrow. Good night, damn it. A silent night followed. The next morning, at 7 a.m. sharp, Uchiha Chi rose. Opening his eyes, he saw the sky outside, a gloomy sky, a sign of impending downpour. A whimpering, tugging wind shattered the windows, caressing the hall and sending a chill through his skull. Preparing for a new day filled with the prospect of death and challenge, Uchiha Chi pulled the scroll Ichiro had tossed him from his bag. He unfolded it horizontally, forming a summoning seal, and a set of battle attire, hastily crafted by the Uchiha clan, came into view. He casually tossed a Konoha-issued Ford protector into the trash can. Uchiha Chi donned a shirt lined with mail and leggings, then buckled on a jet black vest bearing the Uchiha clan crest. He donned the clan's distinctive high-collared, navy robe, cinched with a white belt, and hung 6 ninja tool bags in a roll-up bag. He then buckled a wrist guard capable of summoning ninja swords on his right wrist and a mechanical expansion device capable of activating 1,000 shards on his left. Fully armed, he leaped from the windowsill. A Burin Ryoma had been waiting by the roadside for a long time. Seeing Uchiha Chi leap, a Burin Ryoma raised an eyebrow slightly, taking in the sight of the well-armed, tall, and handsome young man before him. It must be said that even though the Uchiha's brain seemed to be stuck in a door, his aesthetic was truly sharp. This kid is quite handsome. Not bad. It seems you're ready, but don't forget, you're a root ninja now. Put these on, and your sword. A Burin Ryoma pulled a pair of tight black gloves from his pocket and tossed them over, along with the Kusanagi sword. Then, he stepped forward, his gaze cold. Destination, Rain Country. Let's go. Starting tomorrow, I'll strive to evolve from a 4K beast to a 6K beast, posting chapters in 2, essentially combining 3 chapters into 2. Chapter 117, Master and Disciple Meet, Eyes Full of Jealousy. 2 days later, in the land of rain. The sky was dark and gloomy, the clouds hanging low. The beams of light descending from the heavens shrank, casting a vast shadow. A damp, oppressive atmosphere permeated the entire wilderness. Hawks circled overhead, sniffing the scent of rotting flesh. It's going to rain again. A man with long black hair, golden snake-like eyes, and a pitched black kimono stood on the cliff's edge. He gazed silently down at the flat land below, where the breath was held back. His expression shifted, a look that couldn't be described as either pity or boredom. Then, he closed his eyes. The next moment, a resounding cry of killing suddenly erupted, accompanied by voices, the clash of kune, and the roar of ninjutsu. Wind escape techniques howled, hidden weapons rained down in a barrage, fire snakes bared their fangs and claws, and the earth rumbled upward. Fine raindrops pattered down, smearing fine veins of blood. Roars, howls, wails. A myriad of sounds composed a waltz of death. It was precisely because he had been accustomed to such agonies, such scenes, such wars, witnessing the deaths of loved ones, close friends, and apprentices, that Orochimaru found it absurd. Carrying a meaningless title, risking a life worth nothing, he finally stepped onto such a stage. Yet, all he saw was desolation. Too weak, too helpless, like a meteor streaking across the sky, leaving only silence. For a long time, there was no sound from the cliffside. Orochimaru suddenly opened his eyes, revealing a pair of golden, snake-like pupils. He gazed indifferently down at the scene below, at the motionless corpses strewn across the mountain. The war under the overcast sky and the rain blended perfectly, creating a scene of silence, fear, and bloodshed. But his gaze was filled with utter disgust. Life shouldn't be like this. He found movement fascinating, and stillness boring. This was the cold-hearted Lord, Orochimaru. Just then, a gentle breeze rustled behind Orochimaru, followed by the sound of 2 footsteps. Hearing the sound, Orochimaru narrowed his eyes, unable to resist licking the corners of his lips that curled slightly. HMPH, something interesting is coming, soon. 2 men, one tall, one short, stood behind him. They were Burin Ryoma and Uchiha Chi, who had arrived after 2 days of trekking all the way from the land of hot water. Burin Ryoma stepped forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with Orochimaru. Looking at the traces of the brutal battle below the cliff, he frowned slightly and asked, "How many waves of attack has this been from Tsunagakure?" Without even turning, Orochimaru spoke hoarsely, "The third wave, just a test attack. Raza has only just taken over, and Ebizo is in command here. He never fights a battle he isn't sure of." Orochimaru's words were concise and to the point, and Aburame Ryoma understood immediately. Ebizo, along with Chiyo, was an elder of the Sands village and a renowned strategist. His carefully considered strategies often managed to throw the enemy into disarray. With his pair of veteran Sand village veterans on the front lines, Konoha was temporarily helpless. A long silence lingered before Aburame Ryoma spoke in a deep voice, "I've brought your disciple here. You have good taste. He may not be polite, but he's a kind-hearted child." Aburame Ryoma paused, then said silently, "This time, don't let him die like Naoki." Orochimaru was stunned by these words. His taciturn colleague actually praised an Uchiha. He turned his head in surprise, only to see nothing. Aburame Ryoma had vanished in a flash after his words. A gentle breeze blew across the battlefield, carrying a faint scent of blood. On the cliff, only Orochimaru and Uchiha Chi remained. Uchiha Chi knew their master-disciple relationship wasn't the one Aburame Ryoma had imagined. He suspected Orochimaru was eyeing his body, intending to slice it up for research. His decision to accept him as his disciple, pushing him into the most dangerous battlefield, echoed Uchiha Chi's suicidal expectations. So, perhaps, their relationship could be considered a different kind of tacit understanding? However, upon meeting Orochimaru in person, Uchiha Chi suddenly realized he couldn't fathom the man's thoughts. He silently gazed at the devastation below the cliff, not possessing the desperate desire to kill him that Uchiha Chi had imagined. For a long moment, Orochimaru, without turning his head, stared silently at the cliff below. He asked hoarsely, "Uchiha Chi, what do you think a ninja is?" Uchiha Chi stared at Orochimaru's back, frowning. "Orochimaru, just say whatever you want to say. As a Sannin, accepting an Uchiha as your disciple, while cherishing his talent, doesn't explain your motives." Orochimaru shook his head, his voice hoarse. "I can sense a danger in your gaze. It's the look of someone always ready for battle. You're cautious. Do you think I want to harm you?" He spun around, his golden, snake-like eyes fixed on Uchiha Chi with interest. Then, revealingly, as expected, "You're afraid." Uchiha Chi frowned, wondering if his cheap master's brain had been slammed by a door. He couldn't even ask for death, so how could he be afraid of a short-lived snake like you who hadn't even evolved to the stage of a sly snake? He immediately drew his Kusanagi sword, pointed it at Orochimaru, and shouted coldly, "Orochimaru, what nonsense are you talking about? How could I possibly be afraid of you? Do you think I wouldn't dare attack you?" Orochimaru snorted, his eyes narrowed slightly, as if observing something amusing. "Are you afraid I'll capture you, take you away, and dissect you for the secret you're hiding?" He scoffed, shook his head, and said, "Don't worry. I've mastered the forbidden technique, flesh reincarnation, your immortality, the artificial tailed beast in your belly, the secret technique of the earth grudge you, and that flaming heart. I can find the answers to all of these techniques." Hearing this, Uchiha Chi was suddenly startled and looked at Orochimaru in astonishment. "What? You don't believe it?" Orochimaru smirked and took 2 steps closer. He raised his hand, grasped Uchiha Chi's drawn Kusanagi sword, and wiped it, leaving a deep, bloody gash on his palm. The next moment, a white mist began to evaporate from the wound, and in an instant, it was completely healed. Uchiha Chi's eyes widened, as if he had seen God getting a haircut on the street. Orochimaru gave a hoarse laugh and said, "It seems you have no memory of your time in the cave, and the Uchiha people didn't tell you. I dissected you back in the cave. I've already got what I wanted." Upon hearing this news, and seeing that the jutsu Orochimaru unleashed was indeed the forbidden technique, flesh regeneration, Uchiha Chi swallowed hard, his throat dry. He suddenly remembered, with the illiterate medical ninjutsu skills of the Uchiha clan. How could they possibly understand whether Orochimaru was killing or saving people? And how could Orochimaru miss such a good opportunity and not study it thoroughly? Faced with Orochimaru's words, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but take a step back. His Sharingans immediately lit up, and he looked at him with a look of horror. Since Orochimaru had learned forbidden techniques from him, why did he accept him as his disciple? Furthermore, when Uchiha Chi had pulled a Kusanagi sword from the Uchiha clan scroll, something had already struck him as amiss. If Orochimaru wanted his body, why would he give him the Kusanagi sword? There was something strange about this matter from the very beginning. How he seeing the expression on Uchiha Chi's face, Orochimaru couldn't help but let out a hoarse laugh. His eyes were filled with a hint of malicious amusement. Then, he took a step closer and, puff, he let the Kusanagi sword pierce his jet-black kimono, slashing through his abdomen and protruding straight out of his back. Blood flowed profusely, the stench of blood wafted, yet Orochimaru seemed insensitive to the pain. He held the Kusanagi sword and moved closer to Uchiha Chi. He looked down at Uchiha Chi's face, licked the corner of his mouth, and asked with an inexplicable excitement, "Then, let me ask you again, my disciple, what do you think a ninja is?" Chapter 118 Uchiha Chi, be my son. What is a ninja? Upon hearing this question, Uchiha Chi instinctively wanted to pull out Jiraiya's answer from the original novel and use it to refute Orochimaru. He shouted that a ninja is someone who can endure anything. Just like how he used outrageous rhetoric to intimidate hidden and flatter Mainjutsu, he disguised himself as an ally of either good or evil, using stolen, high-sounding words to deliver a psychic assault on his enemies. But when the words came to his lips, Uchiha Chi couldn't bring himself to speak them. Orochimaru wasn't a hot-blooded idiot like Hidden. Such words wouldn't break his opponent's will or deceive him. They would be immediately exposed, their entire existence futile. In fact, as the enemy's strength grew, the effectiveness of such mental attacks diminished. In a direct confrontation with Karatechi Yagura, Uchiha Chi nearly let himself be persuaded. Even Uchiha Chi himself didn't understand Jiraiya's words. Because along the way, others had been helping him along, making choices for him. So, what exactly is a ninja? Contemplating this question, Uchiha Chi felt a wave of uncertainty for the first time. He had never dreamed of becoming a ninja, nor had he ever considered what he would accomplish as a ninja. He was simply greedy for money and family, like a child who never grew up. To the outside world, he was always full of lies, spouting grandiose nonsense that he himself didn't believe. He forced his position to bend, whitewashed his schemes, and deceived the battles. For him, words became a weapon that could turn the tide of battle in his weakest moments. But now, under the intense gaze of Orochimaru, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but look away slightly, his steps stumbling slightly, and he gritted his teeth. For a moment, he couldn't even come up with a decent answer. Orochimaru looked down at the struggling expression on Uchiha Chi's face and couldn't help but let out a hoarse laugh. Hey, isn't that quite honest? Hearing these words, as if patting the head and mocking a child, Uchiha Chi immediately flew into a rage. His glare darkened, and with both hands he grasped the hilt of the Kusanagi sword. He twisted it through Orochimaru's body, carving a large hole in his abdomen. Then, with a broken defense, he scolded, "Stop joking, Orochimaru, listen carefully. My ninja way is to flatten the entire ninja world, sweep the old system into the garbage heap, and rewrite all the tragedies of the ninja world. This is something I can't escape, really," Orochimaru scoffed, his lips curling up. He lowered his head and watched Uchiha Chi with interest, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth to his jaw. Scarlet blood splashed on Uchiha Chi's eyebrows, and then, Uchiha Chi heard the man sneer hoarsely and caringly, "Do you need me to find a mirror for you, so you can take a good look at your eyes now? The heart won't lie. In fact, you don't recognize the meaning of what you said." Hey, Orochimaru sneered, leaned close to Uchiha Chi's ear, and said hoarsely, "My disciple, you actually don't have the answer at all, and there is no completely correct answer in this world, but as long as you are alive, you can find interesting things, just like you have been trying to find the answer in death, but I found you in the pursuit of immortality." A brilliant fanaticism suddenly rose in Orochimaru's eyes. He stared intently at Uchiha Chi. At the three Magatama-shaped flowers of heavenly evil at the back of his neck. Then, taking a deep breath, he spoke in a deep voice, "Uchiha Chi, you simply lack a powerful guide to reveal your true desires." Orochimaru's tone suddenly grew urgent, his gaze hungrily gazing at Uchiha Chi's form, examining every inch of this man who had inherited his soul, capable of perfectly integrating the heavenly curse seal. He fused together multiple forbidden techniques, yet strangely achieved an impossible harmony. With such talent, such a body, he was already far ahead of Orochimaru. This brat undoubtedly possessed a terrifying talent, one he himself was unaware of. A gift capable of perfectly inheriting the very ninjutsu that Orochimaru so desired. A cold, damp breeze blew past his ears, sending an inexplicable chill through Uchiha Chi. He lifted his head slightly, looking at Orochimaru in astonishment and confusion, his eyes trembling slightly. Guidance, and, the thing I desire. This was the first time in his life that someone had so deeply dissected Uchiha Chi, analyzing his body and digging into his heart. Then, With unparalleled conviction, he said he could tell Uchiha Chi that he could help him find what he truly desired. Even Uchiha Chi couldn't help but tremble in his heart. He, Orochimaru, observing Uchiha Chi's expression, grew even more satisfied. However, he didn't continue. He calmly snatched a Kusanagi sword from Uchiha Chi's hand, pulled it from his abdomen, and then, considerately, wiped it clean with the sleeve of his kimono before inserting it into the scabbard hung at Uchiha Chi's waist. After all this, Orochimaru's abdominal wound had completely healed in a puff of white smoke. He turned, walked to the cliff's edge with his back turned, and stood quietly in the cold wind of the Rain Kingdom. A pair of golden snake eyes looked down indifferently at the battlefield below. Reeds grew wildly among the stumps, swords and kunai pierced the earth, and raindrops like beads fell continuously from the dull sky. For a moment, except for the persistent and weeping sound of the rain, there was silence between heaven and earth. The dark and heavy clouds continued to roll, revealing a gap. A beam of golden, sacred sunlight penetrated from the dark clouds, sweeping across the broken world, and finally, it fell directly on the man standing at the cliff's edge, illuminating him and making him shine. Under such an exceptionally sacred and miraculous artistic picture, Orochimaru laughed, opened his arms, and said hoarsely, "My disciple, as you can see, ninjas themselves are not noble creatures. If you get stabbed, you will die. If you get sick, you will feel uncomfortable. After getting old, you will degenerate into a mess." A so-called ninja, as the name suggests, is someone who knows ninjutsu, and only by learning and making good use of all the ninjutsu in the world can you become the ultimate individual. That's all. And you? Orochimaru turned his head, his eyes as sharp as a sharp sword. Straight through all of Uchiha Chi's disguises, through the blood vessels, cut open the heart, and drilled through the spirit platform, peeking into the soul inside that was even more crazy and more insane than him. A feverish grin crossed his face. "You have unknowingly embarked on this path, master all the truths of the world, learn all ninjutsu, forbidden techniques, secret techniques, even bloodline limits, bloodline eliminations. And even higher, ultimately, in unimaginably frantic battles, integrate all of this, reach the ultimate realm and become the supreme being." Orochimaru licked his lips, his voice high and fiery, his conviction unwavering. "My disciple, this is your future, this is what you've been neglecting, this is what your soul longs for. You are just like me, you share my great ideals. Moreover, your talent far exceeds my imagination. As long as we fight, your eyes can replicate the opponent's techniques, whether it's secret techniques or forbidden techniques, they are all easy before your eyes." Orochimaru turned completely around. He stood in the dazzling beam of light, gazing enthusiastically at Uchiha Chi. His voice was rapid and hoarse, as if he had thought of something even more exciting. He gasped heavily, a sickly blush appeared on his face, and then, he stared at Uchiha Chi intently, swallowed his saliva, and said with extreme excitement, "This is simply a miracle. It is a miracle far beyond the normal Sharingan, even surpassing the legendary sage's eye. Uchiha Chi, you really are the most suitable person to be my Orochimaru's successor. Inherit my ideals, inherit my forbidden techniques, inherit my dreams. So, as long as I have it, I can give you anything. Kusanagi sword, flying thunder god, corpse reincarnation, Yamada no Orochi, impure world reincarnation, living bloodline limit, and even the one and only bloodline elimination in the entire ninja world. I can help you tie them up." Orochimaru hurriedly and excitedly, even staggering a little, struggling towards Uchiha Chi. As his figure moved, the golden light in the sky followed, like a spotlight on a stage. It pierced the gloomy, weeping sky, illuminating the drizzling raindrops, and passed over the silent corpses scattered across the mountain. Finally, it landed on the cliff, illuminating Orochimaru's extremely enthusiastic face. He raised his hands and clapped them on Uchiha Chi's shoulders. Unable to suppress his smile, his golden, snake-like eyes gazed deeply into Uchiha Chi, revealing his determination and sincerity. Then, Orochimaru spoke with deep, sincere intent. "Go, Uchiha Chi, become my son. Let us take everything into our own hands, and then we will see what truth is." Uchiha Chi blinked, suddenly coming to his senses. He looked at Orochimaru in horror. "What the hell? I treat you as my chief master, and you actually want to be my father?" "Orochimaru, what the hell are you talking about?" Uchiha Chi yanked Orochimaru's arm away from his shoulders and stepped back repeatedly. The shock in his heart was like a small boy exploding in his head. His mind froze instantly. But seeing Orochimaru like this, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, he He seemed to be serious. Only then did Uchiha Chi truly experience the turmoil caused by the flapping of his little butterfly's wings, and what it meant to be a plot twist. For a moment, Uchiha Chi couldn't accept this absurd reality. Contrary to his long-held belief that Orochimaru wanted to murder him, this Orochimaru actually wanted to be his father, to teach him all his skills. Impossible, absolutely impossible. You want me to be your son, to recognize you as your father, Orochimaru? You'd better not dream of that. Uchiha Chi's face was grim. He suddenly drew his Kusanagi sword and brought a slap to his heart. If Orochimaru took another step forward, he'd explode. He, Orochimaru, observing Uchiha Chi's reaction, let out a hoarse laugh, his frenzied expression subsiding. He regained his cold gentleman demeanor. He sized Uchiha Chi up and down with a stern gaze, then sneered, looks like it's not time yet, but do you think you can escape? Don't forget, you're my disciple. In this third Shinobi World War, I'll constantly have you fight fiercely against powerful enemies, including myself, so you can master all sorts of techniques. In the end, you'll become what I want you to be. Hey, Orochimaru chuckled, turned, and walked back to the cliff top, quietly gazing out at the desolate battlefield. His voice returned to indifference as he coldly ordered, go find Aburame Ryoma. Your mission will be announced soon. For the next battle, I'll withdraw all Konoha ninjas. I'll leave you alone. One more chapter left. Today should see him successfully evolve into daily 6K beast. Chapter 119, Instantaneous Stillness and the Dawn of the Newborn. Konoha's position in the Land of Rain lay along the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rain. War is a continuation of politics. When the four great nations each sought to carve a piece of the Fire Nation's flesh, Konoha knew this war would be a protracted, meat-grinder battle. However, Konoha was deeply divided within the current war. Danzo Shimura, a member of Konoha's F4, advocated a swift victory, a massive invasion of the Land of Rain, across the border, deep into the Land of Wind, with a goal of crushing the Sand Village with all their might, demonstrating Konoha's strength and intimidating the other ninja villages. Konoha certainly possessed such strength. However, this idea was quickly dismissed by the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, citing the Sand Village's location in the desert, making it difficult to defend. The Ebizo siblings were too cunning and strategically cowardly to advance. The Sand Village's internal strife was too intense for them to handle, and the need to conserve strength in the Land of Rice to deal with the Cloud Village. Shimura Danzo was powerless to retort, and could only utter, Hiruzen, you'll regret this. Sarutobi Hiruzen, puffing smoke rings from his pipe, replied, Danzo, I'm the Hokage. Danzo then slammed the door and left, stirring up trouble. The disagreement among the higher-ups affected the front lines. At this moment, two forces existed within the Konoha camp. One was the standard ninja force led by Jiraiya, and the other was the root ninjas brought in by Orochimaru. The camp was established along the border. Due to the country's unique climate, the side facing the Land of Rain was covered in dark clouds and thunder and lightning. Meanwhile, the side facing the Land of Fire was a typical spring scene, vibrant and full of life. As a root ninja, Uchiha Chi was destined for the side with its thunder and lightning and relentless rain. It was a setting that perfectly suited his current mood. Entering the camp, Uchiha Chi still looked dazed and vacant. According to the more fashionable theory, he was being manipulated by Orochimaru. He was given the Kusanagi sword, and he was being used like a mule. His next battle would pit him against 100 mules. Soon, he'd even have to cross the vast border of the Land of Rain to carry out a mad assassination plot against a warlord. Initially, this was exactly what Uchiha Chi had hoped for. He was terrified that Orochimaru wouldn't punish him to death. If he developed a skeptical attitude towards his talent, he'd be doomed. It now appeared that Orochimaru did harbor a skeptical attitude, but that didn't stop him from punishing Uchiha Chi. The outcome perfectly matched Uchiha Chi's expectations, yet, while he remained expressionless, a lingering sense of unease welled up within him. Could it be that his chief master had copied the great elder Uchiha Setsuna's script, waiting for him to die, suddenly appearing and rescuing him? Moreover, Uchiha Chi shuddered at the thought of Orochimaru, now a shrew, forcing a series of life-saving ninjutsu he had developed and was about to teach him. He was already incredibly weak, with few normal ninjutsu at his disposal. He possessed only bizarre techniques like Immortality, Earth Grudge Suture, Forbidden Body Transformation, and Zero Tail. Add to that accursed Seal Body Package Jutsu, Snake-type Ninjutsu, Dragon Cave Summoning Jutsu, Orochi-style Substitution Jutsu, Soft Body Transformation. triple Rashomon, corpse reincarnation, the 8-headed snake jutsu, and genetic modification techniques. He might even be capable of celestial arts. Uchiha Chi felt the urge to slap himself. He stood at the border, half in the sun, half in the rain. Feeling the pain of becoming flesh again, yet also the joy of being able to smack his body to death, he closed his eyes, unable to help but twist his limbs and stab the air. This is a fucking sin. Uchiha Chi grew angrier and angrier the more he thought about it. The more he pondered, the more it seemed wrong, and the more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable he felt. Finally, he looked at his hand, gritted his teeth, aimed it at his face, and swung it violently. But at that moment, hey, Seikun, what are you doing? A clear, urgent voice suddenly rang out. The next moment, a figure suddenly appeared before Uchiha Chi with a swift, fleeting form, grabbing his wrist fiercely. This forcefully interrupted Uchiha Chi's attempt at atonement. I won't let you hurt yourself like this. Uchiha Chi looked up, and upon seeing the newcomer, his eyes glared as if he had seen a ferocious beast. This person was none other than Uchiha Shisui, whom he hadn't seen since leaving the village for a week. Uchiha Chi subconsciously took a half step back, his body trembling as memories of his past began to flood back like a tide. He was now like this because of this man. It was him, it was him, it was him. Recognizing Shisui, Uchiha Chi was so overwhelmed with emotion that his Sharingan opened, his eyeballs trembling wildly. If this birdman hadn't snatched away his mission to the land of rain, he wouldn't have gone to the land of hot water, wouldn't have encountered Shinin, Kokuzu, the evil god cult, or Orochimaru, and a group of men each more sinister and invincible than the last. If he had been in the land of rain, he would have died in obscurity, just like the group of ninjas who had died at the foot of the cliff, in some unknown corner of the Ninja World War. This. Uchiha Chi took a deep breath, closed his eyes in pain, then forced a smile and raised his palm. Hey, Shisui looked at Uchiha Chi with concern, sighed, and soothed him. Seikun, don't blame yourself too much. I've heard about what happened in the land of hot water. Shisui stood on tiptoe and patted Uchiha Chi's shoulder, saying seriously, no one could have done better than you. The great elder using Izanaji couldn't have helped you. Don't take it so personally. Hearing this, Uchiha Chi's smile froze dryly. Yes, there was also a great elder, Uchiha Setsuna. How could he have forgotten about that? It was clear, then, what Uchiha Shisui was here for. Shisui grinned and scratched his furry head. By the way, the great elder has sent a communication eagle, asking you to follow Brother Shinichi and me in the next few days to learn how to use the Sharingan. There are also basic ninjutsu, illusion techniques, physical techniques, and various advanced techniques within the clan. He pulled Uchiha Chi forward and said with a smile, see, you don't know Brother Shinichi yet. He is a very strong and gentle person. Under his guidance, I have been able to use these eyes perfectly, and I found that the Sharingan pupil technique integrated with the instant body technique seems to have a very special effect. Let's discuss this together when the time comes, I think. Uchiha Chi swallowed hard. Looking at the seemingly very stupid but actually real little devil Uchiha Shisui in front of him in horror, and immediately raised his hand to interrupt. Stop, what did you say just now? What do you want to discuss with me? Uchiha Shisui was stunned, then smiled heartily, scratched his head and explained, look at me, I even forgot to name this technique. Why not just call it the Phantom Body Instant Jutsu? Uchiha Chi gasped, staring at the imp in astonishment. Uchiha Shisui was truly a genius. Even without traveling to the land of hot water, he had, as history would have it, developed the jutsu that would make him famous, the Phantom Body Instant Jutsu. This powerful ninjutsu merged the Sharingan's pupil technique with the body instant jutsu. In the ninja world, physical techniques that merged ninjutsu were known as ninteijutsu. This young man had pioneered a comprehensive technique, seamlessly integrating jinjutsu, taijutsu, and even bloodline limits. The previous jutsu to incorporate jinjutsu into physical techniques was called Konoha Ryu. The rank of this jutsu was S. Uchiha Chi felt like he had witnessed the beginning of a legend. And his name was Shisui the Body Instant. This made Uchiha Chi cough uncontrollably, his scalp tingling. Shisui was actually going to teach him such a terrifying jutsu? Enough. At this rate, he hadn't even begun to fight 100 men alone, and hadn't even begun to complete that insane assassination plan. I'm being forced to transform into flesh again. Is this even possible? Is this even possible? I refuse. My mind can't comprehend this. Ahem, Shisui, I appreciate your kindness, But this technique must be difficult. Let's take a long-term approach. Uchiha Chi coughed repeatedly, forcing the subject to change. Also, where are you taking me? This is quite far from the base camp, isn't it? Before he knew it, Shisui had dragged him out of the camp, into the land of rain, and now found himself in a gloomy forest. He looked around, surrounded by a forest filled with a lingering, foul miasma. The sky was gloomy, and a light drizzle was falling. Raindrops landed on the treetops and the weeds on the ground, slowly sliding down. At this moment, Shisui smiled slightly, released Uchiha Chi's arm, and said, "It's like this, see, I met some friends in the land of rain. They've heard of your name and want to meet you." Uchiha Chi couldn't help but smirk, shaking his head and looking at Shisui, thinking, what kind of name is this guy? He's just a chunin, a small-time character that few people know. He immediately shook his head and said, "Don't tease me, Shisui. I've been running like a mule for 2 days. I'm starving. There's no rush to practice. Take me to find something to eat first." Uchiha Chi scratched his head, looked at Shisui and asked, "So, where's the kitchen?" However, at this moment, a bright and capable voice suddenly came from the treetops above his head, and then 3 black shadows suddenly jumped down. A disciple of the 3 ninjas, an immortal Shura who pierced the evil cult of the land of hot springs and stood up to the hidden mist prodigy, Hazuki Mainjutsu. "Uchiha Chi, nice to meet you." The leader removed his hood, revealing a mop of orange hair that shone brightly even in the gloomy land of rain. Then, with a toothy grin, he addressed the Uchiha and said cheerfully, "Introduce myself, I'm Yohiko, the leader of the Akatsuki organization. I've been writing since 2 p.m. Finally evolving into a 6K daily updater. At the beginning of the month, please give me a monthly pass, a subscription." Godfathers, bang bang bang. Chapter 120, Zio's Invitation. He is a partner. Raindrops like beads fell down, and the dark forest grew wildly towards the sky, branches baring their teeth and claws. The raindrops broke through the flowing fetid miasma and fell to the ground, splashing water and mercilessly hitting the branches and leaves. The deep woods at the end of the side were hazy, and the thick mist stained the darkness, as if an unknown horror was hidden there. The surrounding atmosphere was quiet and solemn. Uchiha Chi raised his head and looked at the 3 members of the Akatsuki organization in front of him, wearing black windbreakers with red clouds. Their faces could not be seen because of the hoods, but the color of their hair could be guessed. Orange, blue, and red hair. These 3 people were the founders of Akatsuki, Yohiko, Konan, and Nagato. Uchiha Chi's brows immediately furrowed deeply. Why would Akatsuki, still in its early days, find him at this time? Shisui, he turned his head to look at Shisui, his tone questioning. Shisui was about to explain to Uchiha Chi, when Yohiko stepped forward and stood in front of Uchiha Chi, and spoke in a very formal and solemn tone. "Uchiha Chi, please don't embarrass Shisui, it's me who wants to see you." However, facing Yohiko's sincere tone, Uchiha Chi frowned, and his tone was so cold that he seemed to want to keep him away. "I'm sorry, I'm just an ordinary chunin, and there's nothing worth seeing." Yohiko shook his head, his expression unyielding, and took another step forward. "No, Uchiha Chi, after hearing about your deeds, I have wanted to meet you for a long time. You are a pioneer who truly walks on the path of peace, a link between a clan and a village, and a noble person who is willing to fight to the death with Kurigakure and the evil cult for the sake of foreign civilians. I am inspired by what you have done, so I really want to see you," he said sincerely, with one hand on his chest. "I want to know your thoughts, clarify your philosophy, and also, I want you to listen to our beliefs." At this moment, Uchiha Shisui, standing by, nudged Uchiha Chi's shoulder and offered his words of advice. "See, please, they are like-minded people, fighting for peace and resolving conflicts." Uchiha Chi glanced at Shisui. Seeing the glint in Shisui's eyes, he couldn't help but frown slightly. This little guy was already naive, and now in the land of rain, he'd encountered an even more naive and dreamy newborn Akatsuki. It seemed he'd been fooled. "Alice," Uchiha Chi sighed, looking up at Yohiko. He truly didn't want to be associated with these 3 people. He sympathized with their pursuit of dreams, which ultimately ended in such a mess. However, behind these 3 people, the mastermind behind everything was the true Shura of the ninja world, feared by the entire ninja world, Uchiha Madara. At this moment, the eyes of the naive Nagato were the product of millennia of meticulous planning and scheming by Black Zetsu, hidden behind Uchiha Madara. These powerful figures were now beyond his reach. If Akatsuki's tragedy were altered, the story would truly plummet into an irreversible abyss. With this thought, Uchiha Chi frowned and coldly addressed Chihiko. I don't know where you got this gossip, but I'm not as great as you claim. I'm just an ordinary person, and all I've tasted along the way is failure. Uchiha Chi glanced up at the nearby Konoha headquarters, then at the surroundings. The foul miasma blocked the Inuzuka clan's noses. And Uchiha Shisui had deliberately led them to this hidden corner of the route, hidden from the Byakugan's gaze, thus avoiding any intruders. If discovered, even Shisui would be held accountable. If you have anything to say, please tell me directly. This is not the place for you to come. If you are discovered by the people of Konoha, you will not be able to leave. Okay. Yohiko also knew that the opportunity was hard to come by, so he took a deep breath and said solemnly, then I will say it straight, Uchiha Chi, just as you risked your life for the mutual understanding between your family and the village, and stood up and drew your sword for the suffering of foreigners, Yohiko put his hand on his chest, his face full of energy, and spoke in the most resolute tone, the Akatsuki I founded also acts for such an idea. Then, he turned around, pointed to the battlefield outside the camp with corpses all over the place, pointed to this weeping country, and calmly stated, in order to prevent the Third Shinobi World War, to achieve a future where people can understand each other, and to save this country that has been crying as always, we will not rely on extreme forcing power to create a belief in peace that everyone expects. So, I would like to invite you, we want to invite you, younger than us, yet you've bravely stepped forward before us. For this goal, we need your strength. Yohiko raised his head, gazing intently at Uchiha Chi. He pulled out more brand new black trench coat with a red cloud pattern from beneath his coat. He held it in front of Uchiha Chi with both hands, bowed at a full 90 degrees, and then, closing his eyes, declared loudly, please acknowledge me as your leader and join our organization, Akatsuki. The words startled everyone present. Uchiha Chi's mouth twitched, wondering what was going on. How could Orochimaru just show up, wanting to be his father, and then Yohiko shows up, wanting to be his boss? I haven't done anything. At this moment, no one in the group could have anticipated that Yohiko had come here to invite a Konoha ninja, a ninja he had just met, to join their fledgling organization. Even Shisui, considered a friend by the Akatsuki trio, had never received such treatment. Yohiko, behind Yohiko, Konan and Nagato were startled and slightly bewildered. But after gritting their teeth at Yohiko's actions, they immediately stood beside him, following his lead and bowing to Uchiha Chi. Just like when he had been Jiraiya's apprentice, Yohiko meant everything to them. However, looking at the three people before him, Uchiha Chi remained impassive. He spoke decisively, sorry, I refuse, you. At those words, Nagato, standing behind Yohiko, immediately raised his head and glared at Uchiha Chi with a hint of resentment. Uchiha Chi, however, wasn't afraid of him. Instead, he watched the other's eyes light up with interest. He even wished Nagato would summon a demon statue right there and slap him across the face. Uchiha Chi took a deep breath, looked at Yohiko, and bluntly exposed, you said so much, but what you really want to achieve is just the last one, just to save this country. Then, he asked coldly, then, what are you going to do? Just a belief of creating peace without relying on extreme force and power. How are you going to achieve it? Yohiko raised his body, his eyes remained firm even though he was rejected. He smiled very confidently. I have thought about this question before. I used to think that as long as the other party felt the same pain, they would be able to understand each other, feel the pain, experience the pain, accept the pain, understand the pain, and then, you will fear this pain. As long as we conquer the world and let the world feel the pain, the future I hope for will arrive, Yohiko said in a heavy tone, expressing his truest thoughts. Hearing such words, Shisui's face changed slightly, and he was a little stunned. But later, I found that there is a better way than this. Yohiko raised his head, his tone changed, and he said firmly, only by being open-hearted with your enemy, not hiding anything from each other, and showing your true heart. Then, sit down and drink with him as brothers. This is the way that people can truly understand each other. This is the way that people in this world need most desire, and is the most difficult path. Yohiko raised his head, his eyes firm, his tone resolute, and he said in a deep voice, this is what I want you to hear, the belief of our Akatsuki. However, such words could not move Uchiha Chi. He shook his head, looked at Yohiko expressionlessly, sighed and said, well said, very contagious, but I want to tell you, just this one point, in this world, It is impossible and won't work. Yohiko was not discouraged at all. Instead, his eyes lit up slightly, and he looked at Uchiha Chi and asked, "Why, haha, why?" Uchiha Chi couldn't help but sneered, and said unusually calmly, "Because this is a world where power is supreme." He coldly gazed at Yohiko, who was attempting to drag him down, his tone icy. "I don't know if people can truly understand each other. That kind of righteousness is too illusory for me, but the prerequisite for getting people to listen to you is first to make them willing to listen. Reason is earned through force, understand?" After saying this, Uchiha Chi gave Yohiko a deep look, unconcerned about whether he understood or not. Even this suggestion was his greatest kindness. Yohiko had undoubtedly chosen a most difficult path, a path that even the ninja god, Hoshirama Senju, ultimately failed to navigate. True sincerity can indeed be exchanged for true sincerity, but more likely, it will be met with a cold hammer blow. With this thought, Uchiha Chi, without even turning back, decisively grabbed Shisui by the collar and walked away, his voice gravely admonishing, "Shisui, don't hang out with those people anymore. That guy's ways are too dangerous. If you're not careful, he'll lead you into a ditch." The voice quickly drifted away on the wind. The dreary state of the rain country remained unchanged. The relentless downpour blanketed the two figures in the wind and rain. In the gloomy woods, Yohiko gazed at the Akatsuki robe he hadn't been able to give away, sighed, and tucked it back into his sleeve. Konan, standing by, looked at him with concern and asked, "Yohiko, are you okay?" He seems to have rejected it completely. Nagato shook his head as he watched Uchiha Chi walk further and further away. He then turned to Yohiko and said soothingly, "But it's okay. We believe in you, ha." However, facing the comfort from his two teammates, Yohiko was not at all discouraged. Instead, he burst into laughter. "Who said he rejected it?" Yohiko raised a brow and patted Nagato and Konan on the shoulders. "Listen, Nagato, Konan. The key to mutual understanding I'm talking about is openness and honesty. We shouldn't hide anything from each other. He has completely understood our philosophy, and he has expressed his thoughts to us. That's exactly the kind of openness." Yohiko smiled a confident smile and clenched his fists. "Since he has understood us, the next thing we need to do is to make him agree with our path, become our partner." Hearing this, the two were choked for a moment, not knowing how to respond. Finally, they looked at each other and asked helplessly, "Yohiko, what are you going to do?" Yohiko narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at the disappearing figure across the rain. He thought for a moment, then frowned and said, "Although this guy says that it is impossible, everything he does is to move towards peace. Next, we will continue to act normally. Zainin, you keep an eye on him, let's see what big moves he will make later." And then Yohiko slapped his thigh and made a plan. "We will lend him a helping hand." Chapter 121 The Fourth Battle, Training Before the Battle. Leaving the dense forest and heading back to camp, Uchiha Chi immediately interrupted Shisui. He took a deep breath, frowned, and sternly advised Shisui, "Shisui, I'll keep this a secret for you, but don't contact them again. Trust me, it's very dangerous." At this point in time, the nascent Akatsuki could still thrive for a few more years, but a few years later, once the Battle of Kanobi Bridge broke out, and after Uchiha Obito's dark turn, Akatsuki would soon be in trouble. In the events that led to Yohiko's suicide and Nagato's rampage, Akatsuki, then so powerful that even the three major nations could not ignore them, could have turned the tables. However, Obito, in order to encourage Nagato's dark turn, ambushed the Akatsuki members who came to support them, leaving the organization in ruins, with no one to take charge. Uchiha Chi, fearing he wouldn't live to see that day, didn't want Shisui to risk anything. Uchiha Shisui was silent for a moment, then nodded. The two of them arrived at the camp gate. "By the way, see, the Great Elder has arranged for Brother Shinichi to teach you clan ninjutsu. Don't forget this." Uchiha Shisui suddenly remembered the Great Elder's arrangement and reminded him, "This requires verification of the results. When you're not assigned a mission, you must gather in the woods behind the base camp at 9 o'clock every morning to practice." Shisui looked up at the sky and said, "It's almost time. Come with me to see Brother Shinichi now." Hearing this, Uchiha Chi's face twitched slightly. Practice? That was such a distant word. In the years since arriving in this world, he had only mastered the basics of treading water and trees and a fire style, great fireball jutsu through memorization in the first 3 months. Then came an endless cycle of overworked D-rank missions. It wasn't that he didn't want to practice other techniques, but the aptitude of this body was truly absurd. Uchiha had practiced a D-rank fire style, fire bullet jutsu for a full 6 months while completing missions, yet he had made little progress. Of course, he absolutely refused to admit that this might be due to his low virtue value. It was only later, with the blessing of heart steel and the Sharingan, that he mastered a host of fancy techniques. Now, he was asked to seriously train. Uchiha suddenly recalled those painful times that he could not bear to recall, and his face seemed to instantly be covered with a mask of pain. He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "I understand. Let's go now." However, at this moment, a root ninja cloaked in a pitch-black robe and a bird-patterned mask suddenly appeared before Uchiha. The eyes in the mask's eye stared at Uchiha coldly and said indifferently, "Sure, Lord Ryoma summons you, now, follow me." Shisui saw this, feeling helpless, and had to reschedule the appointment. "In that case, then you can go ahead and do your work. Don't forget to train." Uchiha nodded and immediately followed the root ninja through the rain to a military tent. Lifting the curtain of the tent, he revealed Aburame Ryoma, dressed in a black robe and sporting a purple mark on his side. He stood with his back to a map, the imposing demeanor of a commander. He seemed poised to issue orders and lay out a brilliant strategy. However, as Uchiha drew closer, he realized he wasn't even looking at the map, nor was he even contemplating battle strategies. Instead, the reserved man was teasing a longhorn beetle placed on the map with his fingers. He smirked as he did so, his cheeks twitching and causing his sunglasses to twitch. "Ahem, Ryoma-sama," Uchiha coughed dryly, thinking, once again, the Aburame clan. "This XP is truly intriguing, huh?" Aburame Ryoma's shoulders trembled. He quickly pocketed the longhorn beetle, his hands tucked into his pockets, and stared at the map with a serious expression, as if nothing had happened. Ahem. He cleared his throat and turned around with a serious expression. "You're here, what were you doing?" Uchiha asked gloomily. What? What nonsense are you talking about?" "I was, of course, studying strategy, thinking about how to help Danzo-sama eliminate the stubborn resistance in Tsunagakure." Aburame Ryoma casually raised his hand and pushed his sunglasses up. Of course, it would have been even better if he could ignore the longhorn beetle caught on his finger. "Oh, so that's how it is." Uchiha glanced speechlessly at his scumbag superior. He shook his head and asked, "So, what exactly do you want me to do?" Aburame Ryoma raised an eyebrow, grabbed Uchiha's shoulder, and pushed him over to the map. Then, solemnly, "Your mission assignment is here." As he spoke, Aburame Ryoma raised his finger and tapped a red circled area on the map of the Rain Country. It was a desert. The location is behind several positions in the Land of Rain in the Sand Village. Following the red circle, further on, you'll find the mainland desert of the Land of Wind. Uchiha raised an eyebrow slightly. After last night's surprise attack from Sand Village, Konoha was determined to retaliate. "A root spy deep within Sand Village has reported back," he said. "A shipment of strategic supplies will arrive in this area in 3 days, including a poison formulated according to a recipe provided by Chiao from Sand Village. If we can destroy this shipment, the next large-scale attack from Sand Village will be much easier to handle. That would save us a few hundred casualties." Aburame Ryoma pointed to the red circle. "At that time, a Sand Village squadron of 30 men will be responsible for transporting this supply." Uchiha examined the map, activating his Sharingan and recording the information. He raised his head, frowning, and asked, "So, that's my mission, kill these 30 people?" "No." Aburame Ryoma shook his head, grinning, and said, "That's my mission. Your mission is here." He pointed to the Sand Village camp closest to the supplies. "You, go and stop these people, 300 of them." Uchiha blinked and pointed at himself. "Me, one person?" Aburame Ryoma nodded expressionlessly. "You can fight any way you want. Even if you die here, you have to hold them all off until I fire the signal flare. That shouldn't be difficult for you, after all." Orochimaru said this would be an appetizer. Uchiha swallowed, his eyes brightening. Okay, without a second thought, he immediately accepted the mission. After all, this was the very reason he left the village for such a fight. Aburame Ryoma nodded at this. Then, unbeknownst to him, he suddenly chuckled, patted Uchiha's shoulder, and reminded him, "Right, remember to wear your gear before going to bed these 2 nights. Also, this is for you. Orochimaru demands you memorize it by tonight, or your mission will be cancelled." With that, Aburame Ryoma tossed over a pale blue scroll with a serpentine pattern. Uchiha frowned at this, thinking, You're so bold, Orochimaru. You're giving me a sweet treat and then a slap on the wrist. Are you treating me like a donkey? Uchiha Chi was furious. He caught the scroll with one hand, raised his hand, and unfolded it. His expression froze. Written in large characters on the cover, Orochi style, substitution jutsu. Chapter 122 Science makes my brain smart, Orochimaru attacks at night. The root style was efficient. After informing them of their mission, Abure Ryoma had the bird-masked root ninja guarding the door take Uchiha Chi to his tent. Uchiha Chi was then escorted to the Konoha ninja camp on the other side to collect bedding, food, and other supplies. With it done, the root ninja departed. Uchiha Chi was left alone in the shadow of the tent, watching the occasional root ninjas flit through the rain, moving between Orochimaru's main tent at the center of the camp and Abure Ryoma's. Clearly, his two superiors were also very busy during this wartime. All the root ninjas he encountered along the way were also in a hurry. On the battlefields of the Rain Country, most of the intelligence missions behind enemy lines were carried out by this silent group. No one paid any attention to Uchiha Chi, nor did they offer him proper root induction training. Uchiha Chi, born into a family of ninjas whose only knowledge was throwing darts, fighting, and eating, couldn't understand what they were doing and was unable to help. Feeling suddenly free, he retreated to his tent, with nothing to do, and sat on his bed, reluctantly flipping through the scroll Orochimaru had given him. Orochi Ryu, substitution jutsu. Uchiha Chi's brows soon furrowed. The version Orochimaru had given him was clearly not the standard Orochimaru Ryu, substitution jutsu. It wasn't the simplified, chakra-intensive version Orochimaru had taught Uchiha Sasuke, but the I spit snakes, snakes spit me, I spit snakes, snakes spit me version Orochimaru himself had used. It required both super-fast regeneration and a massive chakra reserve. And this outrageous substitution jutsu, at this point, was clearly still in its infancy, not a fully developed ninjutsu, more like a research project. The scroll was densely packed with Orochimaru's conceptions and analysis of the technique, along with various technical terms he couldn't fathom, and some concerning cutting-edge technologies involving human modification, software modification, and genetic engineering. Uchiha Chi quickly took on the expression of an elderly person checking their phone on the subway, looking at the seemingly unremarkable scroll in his hand. He knew every word on the scroll, but when they were all connected, he couldn't make sense of them. His scalp tingled, as if he were back in the 100 days of cramming for the college entrance exams. Damn it. You expect me to memorize this stuff in a day, while the Sharingan possessed powerful observational abilities, and the intense stimulation of opening it had indeed made Uchiha Chi feel a bit more alert. He couldn't possibly memorize everything he read at a glance, could he? Uchiha Chi swallowed, closed his eyes with a heavy sigh, gritted his teeth, and began writing from the beginning of the scroll. If he didn't memorize, Orochimaru would cancel his mission, and he wouldn't be able to go to the battlefield. So, for the first hour, Uchiha Chi's eyes lit up, his spirits radiant. He could clearly feel his brain growing under the baptism of science. Through homologous sequence exchange, exogenous DNA fragments replace genes at their original sites, thereby inactivating specific genes or repairing defective genes. The sound of a clear reading emanated from the tent, and the passing root ninjas were impressed by the humility and studious nature of Orochimaru's disciple. Even in times of war, he could still concentrate on his studies. He was a true role model for us. However, in the second hour, the sounds in the tent gradually became, ah, 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 ah. The passing root ninjas shook their heads and sighed at the child memorizing inside. See what it means to specialize in a field, and what it means to be a ninja. Sending a child who can only use a kunai to study is almost stupid. It's a misguided act. The fourth hour. Zzz huh? The root ninjas outside the tent listened to a snoring sound louder than a pig's. They exchanged glances, then fell silent. Before they knew it, night had deepened. The sky over the land of rain had finally cleared, a shimmering mass of stars gathering together to form a dreamy ribbon of light. A full moon quietly illuminated the moist earth below. Inside a tent in the root camp, illuminated by the dim candlelight, a young man slumped over a table, his saliva dripping down onto the table and scrolls, cascading down 3,000 feet. He smacked his lips, snoring sweetly like a pig. Suddenly, the candlelight flickered. A stern man in a jet-black kimono silently appeared in the tent. The jade earrings he always wore and the purple eye patterns betrayed his identity, Uchiha Chi's former master, Orochimaru. Watching his disciple in this position, looking at the precious scroll inscribed with his own handwriting, now smeared with saliva, Orochimaru fell silent. Fortunately, since he himself enjoyed spewing swords, scrolls, and other strange things from his mouth, the scroll was made of waterproof material. Even so, hearing the thunderous snoring beside him, Orochimaru's face twisted, and a vein popped on his forehead. He narrowed his golden eyes, glaring menacingly at Uchiha Chi, a sudden burst of murderous intent. With that murderous intent gone, Uchiha Chi, who had been sleeping like a Peppa Pig, suddenly rose. His right hand grasped the sealing wrist guard on his left wrist, instantly summoning the Kusanagi sword. Then, his left hand reached back to the ninja tool bag at his waist. With a flick of his fingers, he unleashed 4 shurikens, and the earth resentment silk threads on his wrists automatically coiled around them, binding tightly. Just as his body was ready for battle, Uchiha Chi suddenly started, waking from his dream and abruptly opening his eyes. Who is it? Watching Uchiha Chi's violent movements, Orochimaru's golden eyes flashed with surprise. This kind of bodily reaction, transcending consciousness and etched into instinct, that's quite interesting. Hearing this sentiment, Uchiha Chi raised his eyes, a slight frown on his face. Orochimaru, what are you doing here? Before Uchiha Chi could finish his words, Orochimaru shook his head and said coldly, although you're somewhat prepared, you're still too weak. With that, his eyes darkened, and he raised his hand with a wave. Ninjutsu, Shadow Snake Hand. The ground inside the tent suddenly broke apart, and 4 enormous pythons burst out, wrapping themselves around Uchiha Chi's limbs. Uchiha Chi was startled, and before he could even consider why Orochimaru would attack him, he immediately swung his Kusanagi sword. Uchiha style, instant sky slash. A crescent-shaped arc of light illuminated, instantly severing 4 thigh-thick pythons. Then, he swung out 4 shurikens, aiming for Orochimaru's head, eyes, throat, and heart. Uchiha Chi's feet created a splash of water as he slid off the bed, his Sharingan eyes illuminating. A flash of fire erupted from his heart, instantly connecting to his arms. A surge of fire chakra poured into the Kusanagi sword, forming a 6-foot flaming blade. The tip of the blade suddenly expanded and extended, piercing Orochimaru. However, the next moment, illusion, darkness walking technique, Orochimaru's signature raspy voice rang out, and a thick darkness instantly engulfed Uchiha Chi. Then, Uchiha Chi found himself blinded. But it didn't matter. He had memorized Orochimaru's location. He simply closed his eyes and instinctively changed the blade. A flash of fire illuminated the entire tent. However, the strike felt like it was striking mud. Uchiha Chi recognized it as a water stand, similar to the one Kokuzu had previously unleashed. It must be Orochimaru's earth style, a form of earth jutsu. Uchiha Chi was startled, thinking to himself that something was amiss. He could only calm himself and close his eyes, sensing the danger coming from an unknown direction, a futile attempt to resist. However, darkness reigned in darkness whether he opened his eyes or not. Orochimaru was clearly aware of his combat instincts. So, how could he launch his attack without being countered by Uchiha Chi? Soon, Orochimaru's calm, unhurried voice echoed again. Nirvana Shrine Jutsu. In the darkness, Uchiha Chi imagined a dreamlike feather falling. His eyelids suddenly began to droop as it drifted. A deep sense of drowsiness overtook him. He instinctively relied on the basic ninjutsu passed down in his family to disrupt the chakra and break the illusion. However, a slashing hand struck him first, striking the back of his head. Bang! Uchiha Chi's eyes glared, and he was slammed to the ground. Inside the tent, Orochimaru frowned as he watched the defenseless Uchiha Chi at his feet. The advantages are obvious, but so are the disadvantages, but a ninja can't always maintain an advantage. Jinjutsu, poisons, bindings, sealing techniques, masterfully refined elemental escape techniques, special ninja tools, or even Minato's speed can easily defeat you. Orochimaru shook his head, opened his mouth and spat out a scroll. Picking up a brush, he drew a circle around the words Jinjutsu and Ninjutsu consciousness. Then, he raised his hand and formed a seal. Ninjutsu, snake mouth binding. A surge of movement erupted from beneath the tent floor. A massive snake suddenly opened its maw, as big as a house, and swallowed Uchiha Chi and Orochimaru whole. The giant snake dove back into the ground. Under the full moon, a giant snake slithered across the land, its tail swirling as it carried the two toward the undisturbed, quiet battlefield. There, Orochimaru's true training grounds for his sons and disciples, Uchiha Chi had no idea how long he'd been unconscious. He was startled awake by a lump of warm mucus landing on his face. Opening his eyes, he was greeted by a massive purple head, winking at him. It was none other than Orochimaru's most powerful summoning beast, Meng Snake. Ha ha ha, that brat, I just spitted and woke him. Orochimaru, this is all my work. Don't forget to give me 10 more sacrifices. Meng Snake, upon seeing Uchiha Chi awake, threw back its head and burst into laughter, shaking the earth. Under the cold moonlight, a cold, hoarse voice echoed from nearby. In the next battle, you can eat as much as you want. Uchiha Chi suddenly turned his head and was horrified to see, beneath a starlit sky, Orochimaru standing on the edge of a silent valley. He held 2 scalpels in his hands, expertly operating on a sand ninja strapped to an open-air operating table. This completely unsuitable medical environment, with no anesthesia at all, caused the bound sand ninja to wail in agony. The shrill, melodious sound was almost terrifying. At that moment, Orochimaru smoothly turned his head 180 degrees, his face still smoldering with blood, his golden eyes fixed menacingly on Uchiha Chi. Are you awake? Very good, I'll be done soon. Then, first, answer me a question. Orochimaru's golden eyes narrowed dangerously, and he asked quietly, how much of the scroll I asked you to memorize did you manage? At that question, Uchiha Chi's forehead and back were immediately covered in cold sweat. It was like that unfortunate person who, after being called upon by the teacher to recite an ancient poem in Chinese class, hadn't memorized it because they'd stayed up all night playing video games, and couldn't even remember the first line. Well, I actually memorized quite a bit. Uchiha Chi gulped, sweat dripping, and tried to argue. Really? Orochimaru, clearly not so easily fooled, raised an eyebrow and asked, then, can you orally explain the principles of base editing technology? Uchiha Chi's eyes glared, and he searched his mind, finding a blank. He only remembered a dream in which he was strolling through a mall with Madarumi in his arms, and on a whim, he said, all purchases here today will be paid for by Master C. Base editing technology? What the heck was that? Why would learning a substitution technique require that kind of thing? Orochimaru, this guy's an idiot. You actually tried to get him to learn your techniques. I'm dying of laughter. Seeing the expression on Uchiha Chi's face, Manzaku was completely amused, and he couldn't help but throw his head back and burst into laughter. Amidst this earth-shaking laughter, Orochimaru's hand trembled, and the sand village under his grasp instantly died. Orochimaru frowned, turned around, and let his head and body reconnect. Then, he looked down at the 2 idiots in the valley. He shook his head, discarding the bloodied scalpel. His golden, snake-like eyes looked indifferently at Uchiha Chi, sneering, since memorizing won't teach you, let's try another method, my disciple, he said, aren't you dying? I found you an opponent. Now, let's fight to the death. Upon hearing this, Uchiha Chi was stunned. An opponent? Where's the opponent? He glanced around, finding only him and Meng Snake in the valley. Neither man nor Meng Snake understood Orochimaru's meaning, staring at each other. For a moment, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. He was saying, we have no grudges against each other, so why do we have to fight? At that moment, Orochimaru turned his head, looked at Meng Snake, and sneered, hey, Meng Snake, kill this brat, and I'll give you 100 more sacrifices. Meng Snake's eyes widened, lowering its head to stare at Uchiha Chi, who was being sprayed with spit. Its pupils instantly constricted. A subtitle flashed before Uchiha Chi's eyes, 10,000 snakes raised murderous intent on you. The next moment, Uchiha Chi felt a shudder as his scalp exploded. Suddenly, his vision swirled, like a building collapsing. 10,000 snakes' enormous purple tails whipped up a terrifying sandstorm, whipping violently towards him. Instantly, the air was crushed layer by layer. A roar erupted, shaking the earth and mountains. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 123, Grilling 10,000 Snakes, The Art of Snake Shedding. When a creature reaches a certain size, the power it unleashes with every movement becomes an undeniable threat. Just like now, the snake's tail lashed down like a divine whip. The resulting gust of wind blew like a razor's blade, lifting Uchiha's hair high and ripping the hem of his high-collared robe. Uchiha's mouth was blown open, exposing his teeth, his face ripped back. He couldn't even stand, the intense wind pressure made hand seals difficult. This crushing blow, regardless of immortality or the forbidden technique of flesh transformation, would have reduced him to pulp. Uchiha's scalp tingled, and he immediately concentrated chakra on his feet, transforming them into watery splash. Water style, water cutting technique. This technique reduced friction between the soles of his feet and the ground, allowing them to slide back in the direction of the wind. He barely dodged the blow, but inevitably suffered a bloody cut from the rubble kicked up by the gusty wind. After the blow, the snake straightened up, its eyes, as huge as houses, sweeping across the battlefield. It quickly spotted Uchiha, who was forming hand seals. HMPH, it sneered, lowered its head, and opened its fanged maw, swooping down with a swift gulp. It seemed ready to devour Uchiha and the vast land beneath him. But at that moment, Uchiha had already formed hand seals, his hands facing the ground, forming the opening stance of a Kamehameha wave. Then, wind-style, sky-slashing extreme wave, a vast amount of chakra gathered in his palms, transforming into a massive wave of air pressure and ultrasonic waves that gushed out towards the ground. Whoosh! Whoosh! The fierce wind lifted Uchiha high into the air, allowing him to barely avoid the massive maw. The snake chopped down head first, undeterred, creating a massive snake hole, and the entire snake burrowed into the ground. For a moment, the raging wind on the field suddenly died. The next moment, a ferocious, enormous snake head emerged from the ground once again, its maw wide open, and it soared skyward. It was like a skyscraper sprouting from the ground, biting down fiercely on the helpless Uchiha in midair. Uchiha took a deep breath. This wasn't a solution. On flat ground, the whirlwind whipped up by the myriad snakes would suppress his movements, making it difficult for him to organize a proper attack. Therefore, he had to capitalize on the momentum. He immediately activated his Sharingan, his eyeballs drawing streaks of crimson blood in midair. He scanned his surroundings, his mind frantically calculating a counterattack route. Reading Orochimaru's textbooks could put him to sleep, but in this adrenaline-fueled moment, everything before him was crystal clear. His mind had never been so agile. Almost instantly, he imprinted the entire valley's topography into his mind, forming a 3D model. The interwoven paths of the silk threads, the trajectories for the shuriken, Mandra's reactions, his battle strategies, even a few flashbacks to Orochimaru's textbooks, he could almost write a whole chapter. Uchiha instantly unleashed 8 shurikens, scattering them in all directions. Uchiha Ryu, silk shuriken technique, 8 spider blast, 8 shurikens pierced the valley cliffs, their tails entwined with densely woven silk threads, forming a simple trampoline. With a tug of his fingers, 8 large strands and 64 smaller strands suddenly stretched straight. Uchiha leaped, pulling the threads, landing in the center of the 8 strands. He plummeted downward. Immediately, the tension of the threads pressed down, creating a spring force. Like an arrow, Uchiha shot high into the air again. Mandra's bite missed again, and a human-like expression of exasperation and ferocity crossed its face. Just like a flea, idiot brat, let's see how you can dodge this time. The snake's eyes fixed on Uchiha, who had leaped to the highest point and was about to fall. It flicked its tail, severing the silk thread in midair, and stopped at the landing point with its mouth wide open, waiting for Uchiha to slide down from the sky and land in his belly. Uchiha's face revealed a sinister grin. Hide, you uncle. You're the first one to spit on me. Uchiha glared at the snake and slapped it hard in the heart. Watch this, today I'm going to make you into roast, a big snake, fire style, chakra mode, activate. In an instant, blazing fire attribute chakra surged from Uchiha's body, forming an almost tangible chakra flame. Uchiha summoned the Kusanagi sword with a flick of his hand, tip pointing downward. He gripped the hilt with both hands and twisted it sharply, pouring all his raging fire chakra into it. Flowing flames surged, instantly forming a 40-meter-long flaming sword. Leveraging the immense momentum of his leap from hundreds of meters above, he thrust the sword deeply into the snake, which gaped wide, ready to feast on his slithering shovel. Boom! From the snake's perspective, the sword instantly illuminated the surroundings, turning them into daylight. It was like a rapidly descending sun from the sky. And it was about to swallow this very sun. The snake was stunned. Who uses a 40-meter-long sword for a slither? but its massive body became a burden at this moment, preventing it from dodging. In desperation, the snake could only tightly shut its mouth, attempting to disguise itself with its sturdy, resilient scales. Its enormous serpentine eyes glared at Orochimaru, cursing furiously. "You want me to kill this thing? And only give me 100 sacrifices after I'm done? Do you think the snake is stupid?" Before he could curse, the flowing flame great sword plunged down. It failed to pierce the snake's scales, but it struck like a hammer. It smashed into the snake's forehead, driving it deep into the ground, sending up a cloud of dust. Then, the great sword exploded violently. Instantly, the valley was engulfed in flames. "Orochimaru, your uncle," the snakes howled shrilly as they bathed in the blazing flames. Uchiha Chi also landed on top of the snakes. He swung his sword, flinging the last brilliant flame from its blade before sheathing it. A subtitle appeared before his eyes: "Dang, you bravely fought back against the snakes who wanted to trade you for sacrifice, gaining a random skill from them. Snake shutting technique, mastery, B, your heart steel stacks have increased." Uchiha Chi was stunned as the subtitles appeared before him. Heart steel, could a summoned beast even spawn a skill? And, the snake shutting technique? Is that a technique? A sudden thought struck Uchiha Chi, and his expression changed. If the myriad snakes knew the snake shutting technique, then what had he just chopped? Snake skin? Uchiha Chi instinctively looked up, and then saw darkness overhead, a massive shadow obscuring the sky. At that moment, myriad snakes burrowed through the ground. Their maws wide open, ready to devour him. Uchiha Chi's eyes widened, and he drew his Kusanagi sword, gripping it tightly. In desperation, he could only hope the sword was sharp enough to allow him to escape before the myriad snakes devoured him and their stomach acids digested him. But then, with a bang, the obscuring shadow suddenly cleared, dissolving into a puff of thick white smoke. Orochimaru, dressed in a kimono and wooden clogs, slowly emerged from the smoke with a smile on his face, his hands forming summoning seals. He had sent the 10,000 snakes back to the Raichi cave. Uchiha Chi frowned in displeasure at being interrupted, and just as he was about to say something, he felt a sudden chill down his spine. Behind him, a double-edged ancient sword, dancing in midair, suddenly pierced the white mist and hurtled towards him at full speed. Its blade was imbued with a dark green venom. With a sizzle, in the blink of an eye, the blade pierced Uchiha Chi's back and exited through his chest. The poison instantly took effect, leaving Uchiha Chi feeling his chakra unresponsive, temporarily unable to activate even the forbidden technique, flesh transformation. Cough, cough, ugh, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of black blood, looking at Orochimaru in astonishment. This was the Kusanagi sword, the Sky Sword. A divine weapon capable of soaring freely through the air, moving at the will of Orochimaru. With a thud, Uchiha Chi fell face down to the ground. Silently, footsteps echoed, and Orochimaru approached in wooden clogs. He narrowed his eyes, staring at Uchiha Chi's corpse on the ground. It looked exactly like a real corpse. Yet, this couldn't be hidden from Orochimaru, who knew his disciple intimately. Uchiha Chi, possessing the immortality of the evil god cult, should not have considered the concept of a corpse in the first place. It looks like the experiment was a success. As expected, you possess such a talent, the ability to replicate any jutsu. Orochimaru stared indifferently at the corpse of Uchiha Chi lying on the ground. He scoffed and said hoarsely, "Foolish apprentice, don't pretend. Mang Snake only knows this one jutsu. You can't possibly learn any other ninjutsu from it." The next moment, under Orochimaru's calm and profound gaze, a pair of hands tore open the mouth of Uchiha Chi's corpse on the ground, pulling it open fiercely. Immediately, a new, naked, intact, and drool-stained Uchiha Chi crawled out from under the old snake slough. Uchiha Chi glanced back at his own corpse and let out a deep breath. "You win, Orochimaru-sensei." He lit up his Sharingan and looked at Orochimaru expressionlessly. "How that's it." Seeing this scene, Orochimaru looked relieved and excited, staring at Uchiha Chi's body, and laughed hoarsely. "With the snake shutting technique as a foundation, go back and memorize the scroll. Even if you are dumb, you should be able to master my technique, mine, the great snake style, substitution technique." After saying this, Orochimaru happily stretched out his hand, opened his mouth wide, and reached into his throat. Cough, 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 vomit. Soon, while Uchiha Chi felt a slight tingling on his scalp, Orochimaru vomited out a new scroll that was as tall as a person from his throat in front of him. Orochimaru patted the scroll and unfolded it in front of Uchiha Chi. Then, he stared at him with a pair of golden snake eyes and laughed hoarsely. Come on, next is my real inheritance. Inherit everything from me, sign your name on this scroll, then, become a psychic of Raichi Cave. Chapter 124 Signing a contract with Longdi Cave to learn spiritualism. Looking at the Raichido summoning scroll stretched out to his feet, Uchiha fell silent. Now, no matter what, he couldn't deny the fact that Orochimaru before him seemed to be genuinely training him as a disciple. While his methods were a bit extreme, the results were quite impressive. Even Uchiha was surprised that he, a complete ninjutsu novice, could master a technique so quickly. His master truly excelled at tailoring his teaching to each individual's aptitude and withholding nothing. Furthermore, at this time, Orochimaru, before his reincarnation and bound by the undying art, didn't have the same urgent need to replace his body as he would in the future. His master-disciple relationship with Uchiha wasn't as polarized as Sasuke's. Orochimaru's dream was just as Uchiha had said, to master all ninjutsu and forbidden techniques, to grasp the truth of the world and become the ultimate being. But this dream was too far-fetched, too long. There were countless ninjutsu in the world, and how could one person master them all? Not to mention the secret techniques, bloodline limits, senjutsu, bloodline elimination, and even the boundless six-path sage realm. The more he knew, the more insignificant he felt. Orochimaru had already endured countless failures simply trying to master the senjutsu of the Raichi Cave. The more he struggled, the more lost he became. Therefore, Orochimaru, repeatedly unable to achieve his goal, became extreme, paranoid, and lost his humanity. And now, through a series of coincidences, Orochimaru met Uchiha. In him, he saw the possibility of success on this path. This was because all of Uchiha's techniques had traceable roots, answers to which could be found within the ninja world. This beauty, a fusion of multiple forbidden techniques and secret arts, was the answer Orochimaru longed for. It was for this reason that Orochimaru placed his dreams on Uchiha. At that moment, the valley burned fiercely, and thick black smoke rose to the sky. Amidst a crackling sound, sparks erupted, exploding into dazzling fireworks in the air. Standing in the flames, Orochimaru looked at the silent Uchiha and spoke hoarsely, still hesitating. There's fear, terror, and confusion in your eyes, but you must have a reason you can't refuse. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes, his golden snake pupils piercing Uchiha, a cold murderous intent suddenly rising in them. Then, with a pointed threat, he said, my disciple, it's alright if you want to stop here, but I will truly kill you, in the way you least want to face. You should understand what I mean. Faced with such a threat, Uchiha knew that Orochimaru must have guessed something and understood what he truly feared. After all, his logic was so bizarre that even Uchiha Setsuna could have beaten him to pulp with a single barrage of rants. And once targeted by a villain as intelligent as Orochimaru, the things he could predict and the threats he would deploy would only be more extreme than Uchiha Setsuna's. However, Uchiha took a deep breath and spoke gravely, Orochimaru, you don't understand what you're doing. To fulfill your ambitions, you're gambling the future of this world on a true coward. He stared coldly at Orochimaru, biting his finger, then squatted down and signed his name on the Raichi Cave spiritual summoning scroll. Then, Uchiha took a deep breath and gazed at Orochimaru with a sullen gaze. Orochimaru, you'll regret this. And the window of opportunity left for this world will end when I inherit everything from you, when the abilities of the world's most difficult to kill are concentrated in one person. Even if Uchiha wanted to die, it wouldn't be so easy. After this, the question isn't how to escape, but how to rewrite this world. Orochimaru scoffed nonchalantly. The Orochi-style substitution jutsu is only the most basic of my techniques. You're still a long way from inheriting everything I have. However, to reach the point where no one in this world can kill you, probably, it'll only take 3 years. During those 3 years, let me have some fun with you. Orochimaru smiled hoarsely, turned his back, and stepped out of the fire. His figure gradually disappeared into the vast blaze. From afar, a hoarse voice, distorted by the flames, echoed, keep reciting the scroll honestly. You won't finish it before the next summoning snake sends you. I'll send a picture of you in this pose to the 2 children in the Hidden Mist and Hidden Hot Spring villages. As the words fell, a flash of white light appeared, followed by the sound of a quick shudder. Uchiha froze, his gaze suddenly shifting. Turning to look, he saw a small white snake scurrying away from the mud, carrying a camera. He tried to draw his kunai and kill the snake, but it swallowed it whole and vanished in a puff of white mist. Orochimaru, too, vanished with a swift sprint. Uchiha Chi was left alone in the valley, and a sudden silence descended upon the surroundings. Uchiha Chi was stunned. He had never imagined that Orochimaru's true intention to kill him would be this way. Threatening him with nude photos? Forcing him to die? No, this was too despicable. If this photo got to his younger brothers, hidden in Terumi May, how could he ever face the world again? Uchiha Chi felt a chill breeze, and his body trembled. He quickly pulled his clothes from the snake slough and put them on. But he soon faced another problem. Orochimaru had brought him here and then fled on his own. How would he get back? Uchiha Chi looked around at the devastated valley, bewildered. Finally, his gaze fell on the right Chido summoning scroll on the ground. Why not ask the magical snake? He was silent for a moment, then, having no choice but to try his luck, he formed summoning seals with his hands. Hi, Su, Yu, Shen, Wei. Following the instructions Jiraiya had given Naruto in the original story, he injected chakra and finally clapped his hands on the scroll. The summoning lines spread rapidly, and a huge puff of smoke rose. Uchiha Chi's feet trembled, and he soared into the sky. Beneath him, a giant purple snake rolled its eyes upwards and cursed impatiently. Huh? Orochimaru, you son of a bitch, why did you call me out again? Sacrifice. If you don't give me a sacrifice, I'll eat you. Uchiha sat down on Manzo's forehead, a bewildered look on his face. Meeting Manzo's gaze, he gave a dry laugh and lightly raised his hand. Hey! Manzo's pupils shrank at the sound, instantly recognizing it as the idiot brat who had just burned his skin. A long stream of white air erupted from its nostrils in anger. The next moment, it tossed its head back, opened its mouth to the sky, and was about to swallow Uchiha Chi whole. But Uchiha Chi couldn't let Manzo swallow him, so he hurriedly tried to withdraw his summoned beast, perhaps replacing it with a more tempered green snake. But he tragically discovered that he could only summon snakes out, not back. Soon, the valley, only recently tranquil, began to tremble once more. A battle erupted in the valley, a battle between early human cubs, trying to master the art of driving vehicles. This battle raged from the starry night until the sun rose high in the sky. After summoning numerous snakes, large and small, Uchiha Chi was forced to flee the valley, engaging in a battle royal across the wilderness. Finally, he managed to summon the good-tempered green snake. Under the silent gaze of the snake, he quickly learned from the green snake how to break hand seals and perform directional summoning techniques, even adding a counter-summoning technique. Orochimaru, who had been hiding in the Iwagakure technique from afar and silently observing all this, couldn't help but smile. His disciple, in the extreme combat conditions, had mastered a series of summoning techniques with a green snake in just half an hour. Orochimaru raised an eyebrow, coughed up a scroll, and took out a brush to record the information. Sure enough, fighting will make this kid's learning ability stronger. Yes, this can be put to use. After understanding this, Orochimaru finally glanced at Uchiha Chi, who was sitting on the green snake's head in the distance, wiping the sweat from his forehead, with an expression of having survived a disaster. He snorted and jumped out of the rock. He summoned a giant snake in midair and stepped on it to run quickly towards the camp. He looked up and glanced at the sky as he walked. It was about 8 or 9 in the morning. He pondered for a moment, then muttered, "It's about time for the Uchiha clan to start training this kid. However, the teaching method of these Uchiha in the Land of Rain is too weak. We need to give them a hard time." Chapter 125. What? Jiraiya will teach me how to perm my hair. The Fire Nation's sun rose overhead at noon. Not far from the camp, Uchiha Chi, exhausted and disheveled, leaped from the green snake's head and followed the hole Orochimaru had dug back to his tent. The tent still bore the same scene as when he'd left it the previous night: scattered scrolls, a tilted table, overturned candlesticks, charred knife marks on the floor, and a gaping hole in the center of the tent. Seeing the mess, Uchiha Chi considered cleaning it up. But he was completely exhausted. After dancing with countless snakes and then dancing with thousands of snakes, his legs were weak. All he wanted now was to sink headfirst into bed and sleep soundly. However, just as he was about to put this idea into practice, a cold shout suddenly rang out from outside the tent. "Uchiha Chi, come out!" At that moment, Uchiha Chi felt like cursing. He propped up the tent frame and lifted the curtain. Outside, a tall, stern young man in an Uchiha shirt and a Jonin vest glared at him. Uchiha Chi was slightly surprised. He had a vague impression of the birdman before him, but he couldn't recall where he had seen him before. He frowned slightly and asked unhappily, "Who are you, Uchiha Shinichi, the tall birdman folded his arms, glanced coldly, and gave his name. Hearing this name, Uchiha Chi finally remembered who it was. Yesterday, Shisui had mentioned a man who was supposed to teach him ninjutsu, and he'd also been on the list of names the Great Elder had listed when he left the village. It was Uchiha Shinichi, the genin and captain of the Uchiha clan's team heading to the Land of Rain. But why was this guy looking for him now? Uchiha Chi raised his eyes and said weakly, "What can I do for you?" Uchiha Shinichi looked at the boy with displeasure, snorted, and scolded, "Have you forgotten? When you're not on a mission, you must gather in the forest behind the mountain at 9 o'clock every day. I'll give you special training." He looked Uchiha Chi up and down, seeing that he was dressed in rags, his chest was open, and he looked like he was suffering from kidney deficiency. Through the open curtains, he could see the overturned candlesticks and the messy bed in the tent. Uchiha Shinichi's eyes widened with jealousy. Damn, this kid is having a lot of fun. As a bridge between the clan and the village, he was lucky enough to be accepted as a disciple by the Sannin. But this brat not only doesn't cherish this opportunity, but he actually uses his status to attract others and sow the seeds of the Uchiha clan. Damn, this is the front line. Uchiha Shinichi's mouth was drooling with anger. "I heard Shisui say earlier that you were the glory of your clan." He glared at him, scoffing disdainfully. "Now it seems you're nothing more than that. The way you hide and the others describe you is the real you. You're still young, yet you're not doing your job properly, violating the 3 ninja taboos. Back in the village, I heard you were fond of visiting brothels and taking advantage of your clan's privileges to complete missions and amass wealth. HMPH, you're truly greedy and lustful. I thought you'd become Orochimaru-sama's disciple after being accepted as his disciple, that you'd become more disciplined, that you'd work hard and shoulder your responsibilities. Now, haha." Uchiha Shinichi scoffed disdainfully, his gaze darting sharply into the tent, trying to spot the hidden Langcho within before lashing out with his Sharingan. "No, wait." Uchiha Chi was stunned, unresponsive to Uchiha Shinichi's barrage of criticism. He was accustomed to the Uchiha clan's sharp tongue, and the other party was right. He was greedy and lustful to begin with, so there was nothing he couldn't say. But what's with that look? It was filled with envy and jealousy, almost enough to open his Sharingan to examine the outlines and savor the hazy beauty. Uchiha Chi followed the other's critical gaze, peering into the tent. Seeing the candlesticks toppled by the battle, the messy bed left by Orochimaru's awakening, and the puddle of drool on the table from his sleep the previous night, he immediately realized the birdman must have misunderstood him. Damn, such bad luck so early in the morning. If you want to see, go ahead. I'll lift the curtain and show you. Uchiha Chi, his face filled with indignation, forcefully yanked back the tent's curtains, revealing the full scene within. He thought, if you caught me in the act, that's fine. After all, doing something like that in the camp wouldn't reflect well. But I didn't do it, and I couldn't stand this kind of accusation. However, upon seeing Uchiha Chi lift the curtain, Uchiha Shinichi immediately turned away, his back to him, his arms folded across his chest, refusing to look. HMPH, you want me to look, so I'll look. What a joke. Uchiha Chi gritted his teeth and cursed. Look, I'm showing you right here, openly and honestly, and how come you, a grandson, don't dare to look? Uchiha Shinichi, still with his back to him and his arms folded across his chest, snorted sourly. HMPH, nothing more. You're acting like I haven't seen anything. Uchiha Chi glanced at the man's back, his stubborn tone, and the drops of blood dripping from his nose. He was filled with hatred, but he also confirmed that this jerk was a fledgling with a desire to steal but lacked the courage. He didn't know what images were conjuring up in his mind right now. Damn, my nose was bleeding. Uchiha Chi took a deep breath, feeling helpless. Finally, he could only grit his teeth and ask, so, Shinichi Jounin, what exactly are you doing here, looking for trouble? Hearing this, Uchiha Chi wasn't even angry yet, but Uchiha Shinichi's shoulders were shaking with anger. He turned his back, raised a hand to wipe his nose, pointed to the sky and cursed, you little bastard, don't you see what time it is? I've been waiting for you in the back mountains for 3 hours. 3 hours, the flowers have wilted, and you're doing this in the camp. Clean this up quickly. Now, immediately, get out of here to the back forest, complete your training with me, otherwise, don't blame me for telling the great elder about this. With that, Uchiha Shinichi covered his nose and walked forward without looking back. He walked so fast and hurriedly that he was out of sight in a moment. Uchiha Chi was left standing alone before the shattered tent, unable to get Uchiha Shinichi to even glance back. He closed his eyes in agony, feeling a pang of innocence that had been so inexplicably evaded. Damn it, what kind of rubbish is this? You should have taken a look. Furious, Uchiha Chi slammed his fist into the tent's support. With a creak, the tent collapsed. Uchiha Chi felt physically and mentally exhausted. He sighed, no longer bothering to clean up. With dark circles under his eyes and a weary body, he walked towards the forest behind the Fire Country camp. Crossing the border, leaving the rain country and returning to the Fire Country, the weather had noticeably brightened. Passing through the Fire Country camp, he saw more people around him. A peaceful atmosphere filled his eyes, and the tune of Peace of Konoha seemed to ring in his ears. White doves fluttered and took flight. Ninjas gathered in groups of 3 or 4 to play cards. Busy medical ninjas nervously carried stretchers through the camp, shouting, "Make way, make way." Walking down the street, they saw a few familiar faces. The canton boss who used to sell ninja tools in the village was now pushing a cart of them through the camp, hawking them and even greeting Uchiha Chi. The Inuzuka family's dog crouched beside a tent, prompting Uchiha Chi to kneel down, pet the dog's head, and ask, "Was I lucky this year?" The dog, a fierce and quiet one, bared its teeth and chased Uchiha Chi halfway down the street. They strolled around with their scooters in their hands, enjoying a long-awaited moment of peace. Uchiha Chi wasn't in a hurry, just taking it easy. Uchiha Shinichi, that jerk, had just defied his will, so he let him wait a little longer. Finally, after a complete tour of the camp, he was almost ready to leave and head for the back mountains. From behind, a large, gauntleted hand suddenly clapped his shoulder. Then, a hearty, unrestrained, and leisurely middle-aged voice boomed. "Yo young man, you have a nice haircut. I have a really powerful move here, would you like to learn it?" Uchiha Chi turned around abruptly and saw a cheerful, white-haired, spiky-haired middle-aged man with a smile. He wore a red outer coat, a brown inner garment, and a forward protector with the word oil inscribed on it. He grinned and raised his thumb to his hair. "This is my secret, a powerful ninjutsu that even my disciples can't learn." Uchiha Chi was taken aback, as if he had seen God getting a perm on the street again. Wasn't this Jiraiya, one of the 3 ninjas alongside his teacher Orochimaru? Wait, what was going on? Why would Jiraiya approach him while he was walking by and teach him how to perm his hair? However, he had never met Jiraiya before, so he could only ask politely, "Who are you?" Jiraiya's grin widened when he heard this. He immediately jumped up, slapped his clogs on the ground, bent over and spread his hands, with an extraordinary majestic posture. He laughed heartily and said, "Good question, I am the white-haired boy of the Sannin, the toad spirit of Maiboku Mountain, Zion Sadeo Ren, commonly known as the Toad Sage. I am here to meet you." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.